Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Our program is about to begin. Please welcome Semaphore's Catherine Bilgore.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, Catherine Bilgore here with Semaphore, Managing Director, Strategic Partnerships and Platforms here at Semaphore. Welcome to day 3. For anyone who doesn't know Semaphore, hopefully you all do, but we launched just 3 years ago in a moment where there was unbelievable complexity, geopolitically, economically, and information overload in a moment where leaders like the people in this room and on these stages really need to understand what's happening in the world. So Semaphore set out to provide global intelligence for the new world economy. And this convening, Semaphore World Economy, is our flagship convening and is really kind of the coming together of the values that our organization was built on. So this week we're welcoming more than 500 CEOs from around the world and hundreds of top leaders from more than 89 countries. We've brought our journalists in from Asia, the Gulf, the Middle East, West Coast, East Coast, New York, DC. And our sessions are really designed to bring together insights, information, research, and diverse perspectives that are hard to come across on stages nowadays. So this morning's session is an important one. It's building a human-centered business, so exploring how leaders are navigating rapid AI integration while redefining roles and skills across their organization. And I think really importantly, strategies for a hybrid human-AI future. So we'll examine how different organizations are embracing that technological development and while preserving the human qualities that differentiate their organizations and make them great places to work. So I'd also like to thank our partner Verizon, who certainly embraces those values for their partnership in today's session and actually since the very early days of Semaphore. They've been wonderful partners and for anyone who's logged into the Wi-Fi, we have Verizon to thank for that, keeping us connected. And so, again, big thanks to them. So quick note on housekeeping, just out of respect for our guests. Try not to filter in and out of the rooms while folks are on stage. Wait till they're transitioning on or off in between sessions. And that's it. Let's get to the news. Thanks, everyone.
Please welcome Representative Suzanne Delbene and Eleanor Muller of Semaphore.
Good morning, all of you. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you so much, Congresswoman Delbene. For those of you who do not know, which is all of you, because why would you know, I actually grew up in Congresswoman Delbene's current district. My high school and college job was lifeguarding at a beach not far from her house. So we've come a long way.
To the other Washington.
To the other Washington, yes. So you, of course, are the chair of House Democrats' campaign arm, the DCCC. As of today, the election is just over 200 days away. How has your thinking of this election evolved over the last year?
Well, I think that it's important to know that, when we came out of the last election, how critically important it is that folks feel like they have representatives who are going to stand up for them And that has become even more true. We actually picked up seats in 2024 in the House. We actually picked up 2 seats in the Democratic House. So we had a lot of folks win in tough districts. 14 Democrats win in districts that Donald Trump also won in. And it's because we had great candidates talking about the issues that matter, authentic, independent-minded. And going into this election, also very clear that House majority is going to be decided in these purple districts all across the country. And we have incredible candidates who are running, who are, connected to their communities, veterans and small business owners, mayors and ministers and prosecutors, folks who really are closely connected to their communities and want to come to DC to make a difference given what they see happening right now, where government has not been putting the people first. So I think we have great opportunities in all corners of the country. People are pretty tired of what they see happening. They've soured on the broken promises from Republicans, and we're in a strong position to take back the House.
What is the number one thing that you are drilling into these candidates in these purple districts? Obviously, the campaign trail is just starting to heat up. We're going to see it get going in earnest this summer. What is the number one thing that you're telling them to do?
Well, I think they know the number one thing across the country is affordability, the struggles that people are having with housing, food, healthcare, childcare, energy costs, gas prices, all going up and going up directly because of actions taken by this administration and Republicans in Congress. People feel that everywhere. And so talking about what we're going to do to help families prioritize making sure that the small businesses who've been struggling, the chaos and uncertainty that has come from this administration, all of these things have had an impact on local economies, on our national economy, but on how people are doing. And so making sure that that is top of mind across the board has been important, like I said, in all corners of the country.
So we've seen both parties redraw congressional districts across the country at unprecedented levels in the last few months. Maryland Democrats' effort died in the state Senate this week officially. What do you think the net effect of those redistricting efforts is? Do you think that they have fundamentally altered the outcome of the midterm elections?
Well, let's be clear where this all started. It started with Donald Trump calling up, Republicans in Texas and saying, "Give me 5 seats." This was not the people of Texas saying, "We think there needs to be a change." In fact, the people of Texas hate this. People across the country hate this idea that Republicans think that the only way they can win is to redistrict across the country and to have them pick their voters as opposed to voters pick their representatives. California fought back. People saw what was happening, and you saw Prop 50 in California where the people had a say. Virginia is voting right now where the people, again, have a say. But people are seeing what Republicans have tried to do. Instead of actually listening to their communities and understanding why they are rejecting Republican policies and the agenda, they're trying to rig the system. And they've been trying to redistrict over and over. They're still looking at redistricting other parts. They're attacking the Voting Rights Act, and that is a case of the Supreme Court. So we have fought back. The American people have stood up across the country. And frankly, even in Texas, we have opportunities to pick up seats because people are so angry. So we're going to fight in every district we can across the country. We have 44 districts on our offensive map and great candidates, and that puts us, we only need 3 seats to take back the majority.
So do you think that there will be an effect in November of these redistricting efforts, or do you think it balances out? Do you think it's ultimately
I think the fact that we have opportunities in Texas where they tried to redistrict, when we see special elections across the country where Democrats are overperforming because people are so angry about what they see coming from Republicans, a disregard for the struggles that families are going through right now, over and over and over again, all across the country in special elections, we've been running ahead. So absolutely, I think we have opportunities even in places where Republicans might have thought they had safe seats.
So we've seen Republicans lean into their recently enacted tax legislation in recent weeks, particularly as we hear, these concerns that you've raised about affordability. How are you advising candidates on the campaign trail to push back on that messaging, especially given that some of those provisions are bipartisan, right? They are. Some of them were things that Democrats thought were a good idea.
Let's be clear just on what's happening with people across the country. Any benefits that they've seen have been wiped out by increased costs from chaotic tariff policy that has raised costs for folks all across the country. Now what we see happening, gas prices skyrocketing, slashing healthcare, driving premiums up. Across the board, families are struggling. If you just listen and go talk to people across the country, you'll hear in every community that folks have been impacted by the policies this administration has put in place. And so Republicans are trying to convince people that things are going okay, but people know what their pocketbook looks like. They know how hard it is to pay bills. They know what prices look like at the grocery store. And that's why people feel like it's been a broken promise. They promised to lower costs on day one. It's been a big broken promise to folks across the country. And over again, they've been breaking promises. So no matter how much they try to convince people that things are okay, people know what they're seeing, like I said, in their bank account when they're going to buy things week to week, day to day, month to month. They see what's happening. And you can try to, tell people things are okay, but they know what's happening, and Republicans are not understanding what's happening in communities.
As we've discussed before, the midterm election after a presidential election is typically a referendum on the person in the Oval Office. If Democrats win the House in November, what can we expect in terms of oversight of the executive branch?
When Democrats take back the House, I think it's important that we have Congress act as it should, as an independent branch, not as a rubber stamp for this president. And one of the things people are outraged by, understandably, is that the blind loyalty, the rubber stamp from Republicans in Congress, no willingness to stand up to anything or do their jobs. We've seen that on tariffs and war powers over and over again. Republicans are struggling to pass any legislation unless they kind of get approval from the White House. We need a Congress that's going to stand up for the people, and that's our job as representatives. So making sure, one, that we're putting policies in place that are helping people across the country, addressing the affordability crisis that people are feeling, number one. Doing our jobs on oversight, making sure that we are bringing people from the administration in, asking questions, understanding what they're doing, what's happening with programs, are things working or not working, are dollars being used in the way they should be, where Congress has appropriated funds. All of these are things that aren't happening right now. And so having the gavels, being able to put legislation on the floor that actually helps families, making sure that we are having oversight over the executive branch, critically important to making sure that not only do we have a government that works, but that we're putting the needs of what we're hearing from communities across the country first.
You've talked about this at length before. I think it's fair to say that a big part of the reason why Trump won election in the first place was because of widespread dissatisfaction with the economy. So what should Democrats be telling voters on the campaign trail to underscore what the administration has done, but we're actually going to address some of what you felt when you elected him president?
Well, let's talk about, kind of the one, again, affordability being the number one issue. Let's talk about what we can do to actually help families. We put them first. First, we could help families a lot by making sure that people have affordable quality health care. And we've seen, just slashing health care by Republicans, not only slashing Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act tax credits, but also attacking basic science, the investments we make in research across the board. Folks want to make sure that healthcare is something that's affordable, that's accessible all across the country. So we need to roll back the damage that they've done and continue to work towards making sure that everyone has affordable quality healthcare in our country. And number one, should be a bipartisan issue. We need to make sure we're addressing, to your point on affordability, look at the top issues, housing, right? Look at what can we do to make sure there's more affordable housing across the country? What are we doing to make that a top priority? What are we doing to make sure we're making the investments that help young people have a chance? The expanded child tax credit, which is something I'm a huge champion on, has given us an incredible return when we had that in place. We had it in place during COVID. When we cut childhood poverty almost in half. When young people are doing better, when they have a better start, their outcomes are much better, and we save money. So if we talk about fiscal responsibility, the investments that we make that give us a great return, these are all things that should be a priority. Tariffs, raising prices for folks across the country, Congress supposed to have a say. The Supreme Court made it clear that Congress is supposed to have a say and that what Trump did was illegal, and yet they are doubling down on putting tariffs in place, raising costs across the country, families hurting, farmers hurting, small businesses hurting across the board, and they don't care. They don't even acknowledge the damage that's being done. That's why people are outraged, understandably.
So one of the things that Republicans are arguing on the campaign trail, in addition to touting the tax legislation, is that Democrats are going to try to impeach Trump if they take the House. How are you telling candidates to talk to voters about potentially impeaching the president?
So again, when we're talking to voters across the country, we're listening. We're actually listening to voters about what's important to them, what they need right now. What they need right now is the ability to get by. Folks are focused on paying the bills. And if you're struggling to put food on the table, to pay for housing, to make sure your kids are okay, to pay for health care, that is top of mind. That is the number one issue for folks. And so we're continuing to talk to folks about the most important thing that we're hearing from them. What are we going to do to help make people's lives better? What are you going to do to make that a priority? You continue to hear from this administration over and over again, affordability is a hoax, or we have to suffer some pain now because it's going to get better later, whatever it is they say, whatever excuses they make. The reality is there's been no focus on the needs of our communities, the costs that have been rising directly because of policies that they put in place, and in indifference to the suffering that's happening across the country. We can have a strong economy if we make smart investments. We can have a strong economy if we actually listen to what's happening to our communities across the country. If Congress actually makes sure that we are making investments that give us a long-term return. These are all of the things we could be doing. There is no interest on the Republican side in doing any of that. It's just, again, a rubber stamp from Republicans in Congress for Donald Trump.
Have you decided whether you will seek another term as DCCC chair?
So the DCCC chair is appointed by the leader. I'm already in a strange position that I'm doing it for the second time. I did it last cycle too. So I think that's pretty much the max, usually someone doing it for 2 terms. I'm very much focused on making sure we take back the majority, because that's the number one thing we can do to make sure that we have a government that's working for our communities, to building a strong economy all across the country.
All right, well, thank you so much, Congresswoman, DCCC Chair. Again, thank you all of you for being here with us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Please welcome Kelly Loeffler of the U.S. Small Business Administration and Nicholas Wu of Semafor.
Oh, Administrator Loeffler, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Nicholas. Great to be with y'all.
Yeah. All right. Well, I wanted to start things off, since it is tax day, by talking about the big, beautiful bill. And so, first off, in your role as SBA administrator, are you planning to get out in states to market the provisions of the big, beautiful bill?
Well, look, this is tax day, and this is a really important day. 120 million Americans have already filed their tax returns. And that means 80 million have already gotten their tax refunds, which are now 11% higher than last year, and 15% more people are getting their tax refunds. So they already know about it, especially small businesses, which you mentioned. Look, small businesses now are seeing a $7,000 savings, at least the 12 million that have already filed. So they know about it. There's more to talk about, though, because as you mentioned, the bill is big. This working family tax cuts isn't just about tax cuts for the hardest working Americans, for seniors. It includes things like Trump accounts, the $1,000 accounts that young people, 5 million, have already signed up for. It's 529 and Workforce Pell to build the skilled workforce of the future that small businesses so desperately need. There are millions of open jobs in this country. So I am on the road already, have been for the last year. I'll be in 4 or 5 states this week. And I do that about every week. I was in Nebraska, Missouri. I'll be in Baltimore tonight, and then Wisconsin tomorrow. So that's what I do. I stay out with small businesses, and really I'm listening. I'm taking back information that I can bring to Washington to make their lives easier, whether it's deregulation or fair trade or tax cuts or energy dominance. And these are all things that are playing out that benefit small businesses.
It's a lot of travel. What sort of feedback are you getting from small businesses, though, on like what provisions are most helpful or things that they would like to see changed?
Well, that's a great question. So obviously the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act bill that created really an unprecedented blue-collar boom across this country, where we had strong economic growth, we had low inflation, we had all these incredible jobs being created, that was about to expire. So tax rates would have gone back up for everyone. So working families would have seen a 20% tax increase, and small businesses would have lost the 20% pass-through deduction that saves them thousands and thousands of dollars that many small businesses have already confirmed to me. When I got my small business refund, which is the first one I've gotten in 20 years, I immediately plowed the money back into the business. This week in Omaha at Blue Patriot, he pointed to a big building behind us, and he said, "That's the big, beautiful building," because I was able to build it knowing I could expense 100% in year one, and I saved all that money, and now I can buy the equipment and hire the workers. And I see that story replicated literally from Alaska to Maine, and that's just one provision of that bill. That's the accelerated expensing of capital purchases and R&D, and it's going to bring research and development back to this country, which the benefits of that had been going overseas. Now we're going to be innovating here in America again, thanks to President Trump.
So one thing that's been in the news a lot lately, of course, has been the price of gas and tariffs. I mean, what is SBA doing to help businesses that have been affected by those?
Well, look, this is a short-term disruption in what has been a long-term trend under President Trump to get energy prices down. You know, what we saw under the Biden administration was record high gas prices. Go back to June of 2022, almost 4 years ago, when we hit gasoline prices of $5, over $5. And there was no conflict going on at that time. So what this administration has done is made sure that we reopen our permitting and our processes to deregulate and make sure we have energy dominance, because we are the largest energy producer in the world. It's national security, it's economic security, and it's production that's happening now across our country, whether it's energy production or manufacturing production, because we have abundant resources for energy that is creating that confidence to build in America again. And we've now seen 3 months in a row the ISM's PMI report, which is our manufacturing. It's one of our forward-looking indicators. Many of economic indicators are backward-looking. This is about economic expansion that is generating a jobs boom across the country. And small businesses are the ones that benefit. They make up 98% of all of our manufacturers, and they're the cornerstone of our communities. They are so vitally important.
Is SBA planning any new programs to assist businesses that are affected by this increase in gas prices or from tariffs?
Well, look, this is going to be a temporary disruption to the longer-term trend of prices coming down. And you just can look at the futures market. You and I were talking about the futures market backstage right now. You know, while oil has a 9 handle today, if you just look out a few months down the forward pricing curve of oil, it falls to having a 7 handle by the kind of September, October timeframe. And then you see the headlines crossing this morning that they're extending the ceasefire and that they expect a resolution on the diplomatic negotiations very soon. So this is a short-term necessary exercise to achieve the objective of long-term stability and lower prices than we've probably ever had, with more stability, less volatility, and more certainty. Because that's one thing small businesses don't like is long-term uncertainty. This way, with the tax cut, now they have certainty on their tax rates are going to be cut, not raised. Again, every Democrat wanted taxes to go up 20% on hardworking Americans. Now they know they're going to be low. They're going to have energy supply. They're going to have deregulation. So this is, in the context of everything taken together, this is just getting started, this powerful economic agenda.
In your tenure, the SBA has taken on a new responsibility, perhaps the addition of the transfer of student loans over from the Department of Education. What is the status of that?
Well, certainly, we're happy to help across the administration in any way. We haven't done that, and we're very focused right now on supplying capital to Main Street. Last year, we set an all-time record of getting capital in the hands of our job creators to the tune of over $100 billion for the first time in the agency's 72-year history. We did that while reducing headcount to pre-COVID levels. We did it while cutting hundreds of millions of dollars of costs. And so our main objective of capital access is to build that economic strength, and obviously whatever other initiatives the president asks us to take on, we're happy to do. And we work so collaboratively across the entire administration. I work very closely with EPA, USDA, and so many other agencies, because small business is really, Department of War, a critical component of supplying so many things. And I'll also just close with saying NASA. So the space program is often driven by the ability of small businesses that specialize in things, whether it's for our space stations or for building rockets. And so it just shows you at every turn in this society, small business is the engine that really connects and makes it work.
I see. One thing that I've been reading about lately is how SBA has been investigating Paycheck Protection Program fraud. That program had been rolled out during COVID in 2020. What has changed since then?
Yeah, so we, 6 years ago, almost, exactly, $1.2 trillion went out through the SBA, about $800 billion of that through PPP, another $400 billion through EIDL. One was a loan program, one was loan forgiveness. What we found in the data was about $200 billion of that was fraudulently obtained, and therefore much of it has not been repaid. Much of it has been forgiven, but what we saw during the Biden administration was that they started forgiving known fraudulent loans. And that was already $1 billion had been forgiven. So when we came into the administration, we knew that the extent of the fraud, but we committed to going after it and having a zero tolerance policy on fraud. We should not have the incentives, and we need to have the deterrence for stealing taxpayer dollars, particularly at a time when legitimate small businesses didn't get relief because of criminal fraudsters. So we're now part of Vice President Vance's fraud task force, which we convened a couple of weeks ago and is working quickly. And we will continue to ensure that those cases are dealt with, that there is deterrence, and that the American people are made whole again.
Given that was 6 years ago, that was during the first Trump administration, was that a failure of implementation and too much money going out the door back then, or what do you think? Where was the point of failure in that process?
Well, look, this isn't about pointing fingers. There certainly was one tranche of PPP and EIDL that went out in the Trump administration, and two more very large, much larger and significant tranches that went out under the Biden administration, where they loosened the requirements. Verification was not done. In fact, now at the SBA, we've added verification of birth date, citizenship. We made sure that now our loans are not going to foreign nationals, but they're going to American citizens. That's just common sense for taxpayer programs. So we've learned from those times and implemented measures that are now benefiting taxpayers going forward. But in addition to the guardrails being loosened by the Biden administration for COVID, they also did it in our core loan program and saddled people who could not afford to take on the loans. And now the loans are not performing in the portfolio because those small business entrepreneurs that started a business, got a loan, were really not meeting the qualifications to get it. And so now we saw hundreds of millions in defaults and billions potentially in delinquencies. So we're working through that and making sure that people that can afford to take the loans and have a business model that meets that requirement of capital standards, all comes through the system, because we can't put taxpayers on the hook for that again.
I see. 6 years ago, you were also in a pretty difficult Senate primary with Doug Collins. You now serve with him in President Trump's cabinet. Have you made up with him?
Oh, I'm so honored to serve alongside VA Secretary Doug Collins. He's a fellow Georgian. Absolutely, we have long had a friendship. He actually helped me in the Senate runoff. I'm proud of the work he's doing. I'm proud to be part of the administration with him. And we work a lot with veterans, the Veterans Administration, particularly for small business formation. If you think about the SBA being formed after World War II, honoring the fact that veterans were coming back with incredible skills and they could start small businesses with it. And that was kind of the engine of the SBA. And I'm the daughter of a veteran. My father started, he's a farmer. I'm the first generation to go to college. My dad started a small trucking company on our farm based on the skills he learned in the Air Force hauling jet fuel for planes. And so I know personally the powerful entrepreneurship that being in the military can generate, and obviously Doug Collins does too. So it's a great honor to serve with him under President Trump.
We're coming up on time, but I've got one last question for you. I mean, as a Georgian, that's also a very competitive Senate race coming up there. Are you planning to endorse in that race?
Well, obviously, we need to ensure that we have Senate representatives that reflect the values of Georgia, and I think it's important that Georgians recognize that our current senators are how they vote. They vote out of step with Georgians, and so absolutely, when we have a Trump-endorsed candidate or a candidate that is wins the primary, we'll make sure that Georgians have good representation in the Senate.
Do you think the president should endorse one of those candidates?
The president doesn't need political advice from me, so.
All right. Well, Administrator Loeffler, I think we're just about at time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicholas. It's been great to be with y'all. Thank you.
Please welcome Mihir Shulka of Automation Anywhere and Eleanor Muller of Semaphore.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, I am back with a new speaker. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us this morning.
Pleasure to be here.
So I was seated at dinner last night next to the CEO of another AI software firm, Mr. Mitra of Outreach. And he told me that when he walked into your firm, you were seated at the front desk, almost like a receptionist greeting people.
That's right.
And he was like, who is this guy? And it turned out that you were the CEO.
Right. That was maybe 15 years ago. Yeah.
It sounds like, though, that you've carried that viewpoint into the rest of, your company's 20-plus year trajectory. Obviously, in the last year, we've seen a dramatic ramp up in AI's not only efficacy but also spending. How are you thinking about what's happened in the last 12 months compared to when you first started this firm in the 2000s?
I think we find ourselves at the center of all AI conversations, especially in enterprise AI. So I think at large the conversation is divided into infrastructure and frontier models. And the second space is how to apply all of this technology in the enterprise. And I think as of last month, the market size of how to apply this technology in enterprise is projected to be much larger. Not a surprise, because there is $1 trillion opportunity there. And we have been doing this for a while. We were one of the first in AI and automation in the space. Today, we run about 420 million AI agents on the planet in 90 countries. Nearly half of Global 2000 are our customers. So we had a lead into coming into it. The timing was right. And we find ourselves at the center of many of the conversations.
So you have a book coming out called The 5-Year Century, which seems an apt way to describe
yes.
AI's recent advances.
Yeah, so we had a view, as I said, we had a front row seat into seeing how the world is evolving. And so we and my colleague, we wrote a book called 5-Year Century. It's coming out in a couple of weeks. Because we'll see the change that normally you see in 100 years in the next 5 years. And what does that mean? And like I've read in the books how second industrial revolution happened, but I didn't feel it, what it meant to be there. Now we get to feel what it feels like if you were at that time, and maybe at a significantly faster rate. I think the way we are organized in our companies will change. How work gets done change. I think this is a unique opportunity in a human civilization where every 100, 150 years, we as a civilization decide what a work should be, right? Farming was a work for 70% of the people. For many of us, it's a hobby now. So similarly, what we do call work today will transform, and it's an interesting time in history.
Very interesting time. We've heard a lot about this week about how AI could transform the labor market. I mean, obviously, that's something I'm sure you think about a lot, given your work using AI to automate transactions. How are you predicting this new technology shapes our labor force?
I think I'll say that on two sides. I think first is in the first generation of deployments, it will have a significantly positive effect on economy. Because if you look at our economy today, there are so many people who make money out of managing errors. There are all kinds of errors in the system. So if you look at, you have companies have a large ticketing system, and there is 1.2 million tickets. All those tickets are fundamentally errors. And then you have an order management system. There are hundreds of $1 million worth of orders stuck because that's an error. We recently heard about cyber risk. These are all the errors in the system. And what these AI tools are especially great at is to remove those errors. So, for example, we can deal with about 80% of all tickets autonomously without any human in the loop within a second. Imagine 80% of that work just disappears. Now, the good part about that is that creating more errors is not the best economic activity. So you want to get rid of errors across the board. So in that process, you will see a huge bump in productivity. So that's the right way for the macro economy to operate. I think in terms of the impact on labor market, I developed a more balanced point of view after talking to lots of leaders and union leaders, and I think this disruption will be perceived in two completely different ways, and they both are right. I think there are people who say this is not the best world we live in. We can imagine a better world. We can imagine a better healthcare, better this, better retail, better everything. They are super excited because this is the tool of a lifetime to make everything better. We have a customer who automated a process with AI and saved 4,000 lives. Now, we should be appalled that you have an administrative process that costs 4,000 lives. So on one hand, those people, when you talk to, they're super excited. This is unbelievable. There is another group of people who say, look, I worked very hard in my life, and I need the world to fit me. And there are times in all of our life where that is true, maybe for a small period of time, but we want world to fit us. And that would be challenging for them because world cannot stop. It has to keep moving forward. Otherwise, there are sovereign risks. So countries don't have a choice but to continue on this path. So like globalization, and I think we could learn from it, right? But the most important part, where it works for some and doesn't work for others, I think what can we do better this time so that it works for more people? And I think that's an important conversation to have.
I mean, that's the question that the White House asked itself recently. We saw them put out a AI regulatory framework. Of course, that's something that Congress needs to enact. We haven't seen a lot of real momentum there, at least not in the last couple of weeks. And so, I mean, what were your thoughts on the framework the White House put out, especially knowing what you know about the way other countries have tackled this same issue?
I think it's in the right direction. I don't think we can work with a maze of 50 different states doing their AI. I think we need to find a commonsensical law that works for everybody. I think fighting against scams and child safety, and so it has all the right elements. I think one area where we need to go further is a national framework of adoption of AI. So if you look at working age in US, working age population adoption of AI, the last I knew was about 28%, and we are way down the list of other countries in how well the people are adopting AI. And it's understandable, people have fears, but I think a national framework for a faster adoption will allow everybody to come with us. And you're always fearful of things you don't know, and then once you use it, like I encourage people to try to push AI tools to a limit where you know where it fails. And then you understand, oh, this is where I come in, where AI tool fails. And you will only understand it, and each one of us has to understand it, how far it goes, and its capabilities, so that we can find a right way to interact with it. And that takes time, and I think we need to accelerate that journey for everybody.
It seems like perhaps some of the skepticism on Capitol Hill could be because lawmakers are worried that it's a politically unpopular position to be seen siding with the AI industry, given the pushback to data centers, among other things. How can firms like yours help improve the public's trust of the data center issue as we seek regulation?
That is challenging. I think public trust. So I think first of all, some commonsensical things have to be done right. I think citizens' utility bills shouldn't go up for data centers and things like that, and more transparency and community benefits. Because if you don't get that right, there is no way to know that technology would be seen as an evil. I think in past technologies, whether it was microwave ovens or dishwasher or cars, were seen as a benefit to society. And somewhere in this journey, we have lost that. We stopped communicating to people. We don't take time in explaining to people how this benefits the society. We don't invest, like I mentioned, adoption is at 28%. That means 72% people don't even have an idea what this thing is. So how are you supposed to develop trust? I think a governed deployment across society, across every sector, and a huge reskilling, upskilling effort is essential for trust. I think it's a foundation for trust.
What about this meeting that the Treasury Secretary recently called with the CEOs of big banks to discuss the risks that Anthropic's, right, those could potentially pose to the financial system? Yeah. How should firms like yours be talking to voters about that?
I think that is just the beginning. I think, as I mentioned, our systems are filled with errors everywhere because it's so complex, and I think you will find holes in our security, you will find holes in tax system, everywhere where complexity lies and the fraud lies, you will discover tons of it because that's how society operates today. I think CEOs needs to get behind it with an urgency. And in a short run, it will feel like not a right investment, but when you remove all of that, you take a huge step change in how everything operates. And but we are at the very beginning of it, and it needs to be dealt with great seriousness.
So your team mentioned before we got on stage that other software companies like Salesforce and Workday have not fared as well as their AI counterparts. And I think the phrase that was used was SaaSpocalypse.
Yes. Yeah, are we going there?
What is your diagnosis there? Why do you think that we're seeing that trend?
I think SaaS apocalypse, SaaS transformation is real. I think it is unevenly distributed. So I mentioned that if you are in a business of managing errors like ticketing systems, and it exists in every sector, I think you have a bigger risk than just having a seat-based license model. Your need to exist should be questioned. Now, it should exist because it will never go away, but it shouldn't be this important in the economy. So I think as the economy shifts towards errorless operation, that will, and it will accelerate maybe let's say 12 months down the road at a significant pace. So for us today, it takes us for a large corporation 9 months to get an approval, and AI audits and AI committees have to pass through it. It takes 9 months to agree to deploy something. And it takes us 2 months to just deploy it and completely transform operations. So there's something is quite uneven about it, right? It takes much longer to decide what to do. I think somewhere along this line, this will become a common sense as more and more people do. And then when it accelerates is when I suspect that some of those impacts will be significant. Like in our business, we got rid of 30% of seat license across the board because we could orchestrate work across all of these systems, and many people never have to log into those systems. So that's just the new reality of how world should operate. I think for the last 30 years, we operated in the world where people were serving thousands of applications. I think without a doubt, we are going into a world where AI agents will orchestrate this work and they will serve people. I think it's the right step.
Well, as far as your own firm's trajectory, the information reported in January that you were in talks to buy software providers C3.ai and maybe go public. Is that true?
I think time to time we look at various companies we can acquire. At a given time, we look at about 400 of them. We acquired one company called Acera not too long ago, and a few others in the past. I think we'll continue to evaluate our choices and then make moves. We have a unique opportunity to create a world's foremost platform on autonomous work, right? So if you were to build the world's largest company today, or possibly one of the largest companies today, it has to be done around the future of work. And our vision is this idea of an autonomous enterprise where 80% of work as exists today is either fully autonomous or AI assisted. And in certain areas, like I mentioned, ticketing and various other areas, you could do what 1,000 people do in a year in 2 hours. So that kind of transformation is what we are, and so in order to build that company with that kind of capability, we'll always look for possibilities.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, all of you, for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome Brianne Olson of PacSun and Rohan Goswami of Semaphore.
Got to make sure the branding's upside right. Bree, thanks for joining us. I am not your, obviously, typical consumer. PacSun is targeted much more at a younger, I would say generally woman audience. And there's been a lot of sort of upheaval in the fast fashion space, both with tariffs and with supply chain issues, but also just changing consumer tastes. You and I were talking about this backstage. As a CEO, right, you're responsible for the financial side of the business, but also the creative side of the business. How do you sort of skate where the puck is going when it comes to fashion?
So thank you so much for having me. I would say first and foremost, PacSun is a purpose-driven brand. And so we are rooted in a mission to inspire the next generation of youth. And we define that starting at 16 to 24. Surprisingly to some, we're about 50-50, men's and women's.
I did not know that.
So we're bridged pretty equally across what we represent. And about 35% of our business is digital. So over the last...
And when you say digital, you mean online channels?
Yes,
okay.
Correct. And when you think about the transformation of the brand over the last 10 years, many of you might remember the PacSun that was founded in 1980 that was a surf skate brand. We have worked very diligently to reinvigorate the brand through 4 very clear pillars. And so we build community at the intersection of sports, music, fashion, and art. So some of our top brands in our stores today include our collaboration with Formula One, a 4-year partnership with the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a partnership with Selena Gomez for the Rare Denim Collection, which gives back to mental youth resources. So it's been a transformational shift, all starting with a real core and purpose. So back to your initial question, when you ask about fast fashion, PacSun is not here to chase trends. We are very clear in our value proposition, what we offer to the consumer, and there's certainly been disruption. And from a tariff standpoint and a macroeconomic standpoint, I think the reason that we've been able to be so successful over the last 3 years is the power of our model of co-creation.
Tell us about that a little bit.
So co-creation is a philosophy or a model that we've been developing behind the scenes for 5 or 6 years. And I have an upcoming book called Co-Created, The Cultural Strategy that reinvigorated PacSun, coming out on May 12th, which goes through the transformation from bankruptcy and how a legacy brand was able to reinvent themselves successfully. And co-creation is the philosophy that first and foremost, you have to transform your internal culture. So it starts on the inside of the brand first. And then we invite the consumer, our community, to really have a seat at the table and to build the future alongside us. So it's a real shift in terms of relinquishing traditional models of control and a command and control relationship with the consumer to actually inviting them in to be a part of the process.
I want to press you there just a little bit because, as you just said, you don't chase trends. But when you're talking about this idea of co-creation, that your end users are shaping and informing what you do, what you make, what your products look like, isn't inherent in that model a degree of control-less chase? Your consumers are driving what they want to see, what they want to wear. So whether you like it or not, you are being sort of pulled along by those trends. Doesn't that make it very hard to actually make the products that you're selling?
No, I think it actually gives us real clarity and a unique place in the market. That's why establishing our 4 pillars of music, fashion, art, and sport were so key to ensuring that we stay on a consistent path with the consumer. And I think the power of co-creation takes the youth, these youth audiences who Gen Z and Gen Alpha want a seat at the table. They are voting for brands that give them a voice. So we have established programs such as the Youth Advisory Council, which actually gives a seat at the table. It's a program that lasts 12 months. We have 14 participants. Their ages range from age 13 to 26. And they don't just come in like a traditional focus group and advise us on what product to create. They're advising us on strategy. They are looking at technology innovations such as social commerce apps and community apps that we're building. So we're really giving them a true voice at the table. Another reason that we started the Youth Report by PacSun, which is powered by Global Data, is we actually do our own research on Gen Z and Gen Alpha. And there's clearly a lot of research that exists out there on Gen Z, but we recognize that there was space in the market to more deeply understand the behavioral shifts that are happening that then as a consequence are changing consumption patterns. And in that research, we recognize so much in terms of how co-creation needs to scale and for brands to really have a defensible position in the future that they need to bring the consumer inside.
But I want to turn to sort of the financial side of the business in a second, but I want to keep on this for just one more question. You know, every brand, but I think especially sort of cultural brands, fashion brands, are very subject to the vicissitudes of social media and the sort of accelerant and virality that, to the upside and the downside, that going viral brings. And I'm sort of wondering how, as a brand that, to your point, is trying to bring youth in, is trying to sort of make them more part of the process, how you compete with larger, deeper pocketed competitors who can sort of flood the zone, whether that's with influencer promotions or actual paid advertising. How do you sort of get yourself out there in a marketplace where everyone is competing for exactly this cohort for the same reasons that you are? They are sticky consumers. They're largely immune to downturns. How do you compete there?
Yeah, I think a few things give us a competitive advantage. First of all, 10 years ago, if you think about PacSun's product matrix, we had not a single item in our store that carried the label PacSun. Mm-hmm. Today, in our assortment, 51% of our sales are done against the PacSun brand. When we do customer intercepts, consumers speak about the PacSun brand with strong emotional affection. It's a brand that makes them feel seen. It's a brand that makes them feel like it's a safe place to shop across both aisles of the store. Mm-hmm. And so I think when we think about the competition, certainly they might have broader or deeper marketing opportunities, which is why we choose to market alongside our consumer. We were one of the first brands in 2019 that recognized that TikTok would be more than a social media platform. It was going to be more than a dance app. And I write about this in the first chapter of the book Co-Created. We launched in 2021 and we're the most successful brand on TikTok, selling almost 1 million pairs of jeans.
And is that through the TikTok store, or is that through
That's on TikTok store.
Okay.
And so TikTok alone has become almost 10% of our digital sales. And what it shows is that there is a shift in behavior. There's a shift into visual shopping. There is a shift happening. And I think it's really important as a smaller brand, you might be more nimble to move more quickly, to identify these trends, and to be able to effectively co-create with your community.
Let's talk about sort of the TikTok of it all, because for the last 15, 20 years, really since the internet became widely accepted as a medium, as a channel for sales, there has been this real push, not just by retailers, but by media, by financial institutions, to own fully end-to-end every part of the customer experience, whether that's data, whether that's actual point of sale. And then you're not the only brand that's selling and making a lot of money off the TikTok store. But where I sit, it surprises me that CEOs are so willing to put so much of their fate, so much of their business on a platform in the hands of institutions that they cannot control. They don't own the data, they don't own the actual point of sale, and frankly, the way they're surfacing algorithmically is a mystery even to the best social media experts. How do you think about that risk when you are sort of, in a way, giving up the direct relationship with the customer, even as you're going directly to them?
I would argue that instead of viewing it as giving up a relationship with the consumer, we're building new relationships with the consumer. Mm-hmm. And when we look at our business in these social commerce spheres, we are empowering young people to create meaningful revenue streams. And so
you're saying as partners or influencers or for your business?
The way PacSun is operating on TikTok is we believe in the power of the open creator platform. So we don't contract influencers or creators to create content on our behalf. Because they love our brand, they then create content and they get an affiliate commission for everything that they're selling. And so back to our purpose and our core of inspiring the next generation of youth, I think it's really important to also think about the economic upside for the audiences that we're not only including from a commerce shopping standpoint, but also from a community and culture standpoint. And so it's an area I feel very passionately about. We do, however, acknowledge the lack of directness in terms of owning your customer data. And so about 16 months ago, we started by building overseas a app called the PacSun Community App, which actually has an AI backbone and algorithm, and it is the conversion of commerce, social commerce, culture, and community. So it brings the concept of co-creation to life, and it protects the differences in terms of if someone were to have asked me 12 months ago, if TikTok went away tomorrow, where would your customer go?
Which was a possibility.
Which it was a possibility. And it's still variable in terms of the different types of platforms that will matter in the future. And so this hub is incredibly important in terms of the brand continuing to have that relationship and manage the relationship with the consumer.
Let's turn now to sort of the financial side of things. As you mentioned when we started here, PacSun filed for bankruptcy more than 10 years ago. And you were bought out of that process by a private equity firm, Golden Gate, which many of us are probably familiar with. And they've owned you that entire time, which is a very long time for a private equity fund to own someone, to be held privately. As you and I were talking about, it's very nice that you don't have quarterly earnings calls, but I guess maybe give us a sense of what it's like to be running a company that's been a portco for so long. And also, what does the future look like? Is it an IPO? Is it another private to private? What can you share with us about sort of the financial side of running a portfolio company?
Yeah, I'd first start with, I think private equity brings a certain type of discipline to the business in terms of how we allocate our investments and capital investments, how we view and monitor our results and measure our results. But it's really all grounded in the concept of co-creation, and we do have the customer's voice embedded across every single part of our organization, not just in terms of product inputs, not just in terms of marketing, really throughout as a key layer. When you look at what purpose has meant to PacSun, and we created our new purpose of inspiring the next generation of youth, just about shy of 3 years ago, we have delivered 12 quarters of positive comps, 9 of which have been double-digit positive comps, and have had improved profitability each quarter. And so I do think that there is a very important correlation of businesses can be community-focused. They can do good. They can be a source for good. They can give back to the consumer, and they can put the community at the center, at the heartbeat of what the company stands for, and produce really phenomenal results.
Let's talk about the sort of doing good or being good, because there was a moment, largely during COVID, and it does seem to have abated, where consumers, especially your cohort, the younger cohort, were very sensitive about where products came from. There's a real push against sort of Chinese-sourced cotton. There was a real push against sweatshops, whether that was in Bangladesh or across the Caribbean. And where I sit, obviously I don't deal with this every day, that moment seems to have subsided. First of all, is that true? And second of all, where do you source most of your products from? Where do your goods come from?
Our sourcing strategies continue to shift and evolve based off of the macro situation, but the majority of our goods do come from Asia or Mexico. And I would say from a consumer standpoint, one of the reasons that we started the PacSun Youth Report, which is in partnership with Global Data, was to get at some of the contradictions that are happening in terms of what customers actually purchase and what customers actually feel, and the anomalies between Gen Alpha, which is our future cohort of consumers, and Gen Z, who squarely sits in our core demographic today. And I think staying very close to the consumer as these patterns continue to evolve will help us keep ourselves ahead.
Wonderful. We're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately, Bree. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Please welcome United States National Cyber Director Sean Cairncross and Morgan Chalfant of Semaphore.
Director Karen Cross, thank you so much for being here and making the time.
Oh, thank you, Morgan, for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for your time and attention.
So I want to dive right in because there's a lot of cyber news right now. Obviously, one thing that's on everyone's mind is Mythos from Anthropic. And you know, there was this meeting at the Treasury Department of top Wall Street bankers just about the cyber risks that posed by this new technology. I'm wondering if you think Mythos should be sold publicly or sold widely, just given the concerns that the U.S. government has.
Yeah, well, first, let me back up. I think, Morgan, Mythos is the model right now that everyone's talking about, but AI generally is increasing, the models are increasing in skill and capacity. And I think it's a remarkable reflection of the innovation and genius and the capacity of the United States. And I think this President Trump and his forward-leaning position on, and the president has been very clear about this, as we speed innovation, as we look to stay ahead and win this race, which I don't think necessarily has a finish line. I think it is a perpetual state of iterative improvement. It's important that we do it responsibly, that we deploy these systems safely, and they have a tremendous capacity. Everyone is focused on risk as well, which is certainly an issue, but they have a tremendous capacity on the defensive side to help fix vulnerabilities that were previously very hard to do. So it is a balance. But I would say from the White House perspective, we are working very closely with industry. We've been in close collaboration with the model companies across the interagency to make sure that we are evaluating and doing this, as I said, in a responsible way.
And there was some reporting from Bloomberg yesterday that the Treasury Department, the Trump administration, is trying to gain access to Mythos. I mean, do you expect that, you know, the government to be able to get that access, just given kind of the difficult relationship with Anthropic?
Sure. Like I said, we're working closely with the large language model companies. We're working closely with the tech sector. We're working closely with industry to make sure that we do this in a responsible fashion.
And one more on this. Anthropic's Jack Clark said on one of these stages earlier this week that, you know, it's only a matter of time for China to get in this business and to develop this kind of technology as well. Do you think that that's the case?
Well, look, I think Morgan, you can look at any technology, not just this. Like I said, this race, it sort of applies across other races as well. You're constantly in that you're running that with adversarial or competitive nation states. And so I think it would be irresponsible from the United States government side of things to assume that wouldn't be the case. I think the mindset has to be, look, this is a tremendous advantage that we have right now, and thankfully this technology, as I said, is born in America, but we want to make sure that it's handled responsibly, and we want to make sure that our mindset on it is with an eye toward the safety and security of the American people.
And I want to move to the Iran war. You know, there was some reporting about the FBI director's personal email being hacked by Iranian-linked actors. Are you seeing other efforts by Iran to target U.S. officials, critical infrastructure, other sensitive targets during the war?
Well, sure, but Iran has never been a good actor in this space, Morgan. They are a perpetual bad actor. They've never stopped trying to push in this regard, and so that remains unchanged. I think, you know, the president signed in March a new cyber strategy for the country. The first pillar of that strategy is shaping adversary behavior, which is to say, we're watching speed and scale and the technological improvements in this domain move very quickly. There are so many points of defense that resiliency and defense alone isn't enough to handle this problem. And so what the administration is doing is taking cyber, which has been adjacent to other issues to date, and it's historically grown up that way for a host of reasons, but we are consolidating that so there is a principal point of policy coordination across the United States government with a signal from the very top, this is the direction the United States of America wants to move in this space. And that tone is, we are going to protect American interests in cyberspace, and we are going to treat this as a priority using a whole of government approach. So if you threaten our interests here, there is a consequence to pay for those actions, not necessarily cyber. That can be diplomatic, it can be economic, it can be cyber, it can be other consequences. But those sort of norms have to be set as we're seeing this speed and scale start to pick up.
Mm-hmm. And I do want to get to the cyber strategy, but just one more on Iran. It sounds like you're not particularly worried then about an uptick in attacks from them.
No, that's my job to be worried about that. So I'm very worried about that. I think everyone throughout the national security architecture is worried about that and has eyes on that. Mm-hmm. And Iranian actors who seek to create chaos in this space are paying a consequence mm-hmm. and have their hands full at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Has the U.S. posture changed in any way to kind of, given the war, to look out for these kind of threats? Or?
Well, it's changed insofar as there is a war.
Right.
So that in and of itself, by definition, is a change. But with respect, like I say, to Iranian activity, they have never been good actors in this space. Mm-hmm. With respect to the domain generally, the posture of the United States is changing and has changed, mm-hmm. Which is reflected by the strategy. Mm-hmm.
And on China, obviously China is very active in cyberspace. There's a lot of stories about hacking, theft of intellectual property, hacks of critical infrastructure. Mm-hmm. President Trump has this meeting with Xi Jinping coming up in May. Do you reasonably expect some kind of agreement or detent or anything on cybersecurity to come out of that meeting? How does cyber fit into that meeting?
Well, like I say, the reason the administration is changing posture on this is there are too many points to play defense. So when we start to see things like pre-positioning on critical infrastructure, that is something that needs to be addressed so that the systems that people rely on for daily life remain safe. And so we are pressing to make sure that that's the case.
Mm-hmm. And do you expect cyber to be part of those conversations, when the president goes to Beijing?
I would expect that the safety and security of the American people will be first and foremost, as it always is for the president.
Mm-hmm. And, we are still in a DHS shutdown. We'll see where Congress gets on that by the end of the week. One of the impacted pieces is obviously CISA at DHS, which handles, coordinating with the private sector on cyber threats. How has this shutdown impacted the U.S.'s ability to defend, deter?
Well, CISA is the operational defensive agency for the country. It's not something that is assigned elsewhere, and so the shutdown isn't beneficial in that regard. It needs funding, mm-hmm. it needs support, and it needs attention. And so, like I say, we want to see that funding restored quickly.
Mm-hmm. And on the cyber strategy, this was obviously issued last month. What is the plan for implementing this? Will there be implementation guidance
Sure.
soon?
Yeah, well, I mean, the plan, so the administration doesn't, this administration acts. It is not the inter-office memo crew. And so rather than laying out a table of contents and then an index and then a chapter, what we do is act. And so the same day the president signed the strategy, he signed at the same time a cybercrime executive order. And this executive order does a number of things, but principally identifies ransomware and criminal groups as transnational criminal organizations. And so what that does, getting to my point on the strategic shift, is right now we are in a posture where we respond to ransomware actors or attacks on an incident-by-incident basis. But that doesn't do anything to dent strategically the level of that activity. In fact, that activity is ramping up. It's asymmetrical. The rewards for that activity are far outweigh the costs. And so now what we are doing collectively as a federal government is saying, how can we strategically approach this problem and maybe put these guys on the defensive rather than sitting and waiting for them to act? Because those response options, once something has happened, aren't that great. There are sometimes you're tracking the group, sometimes you're not tracking the group. What are you going to do? Take down their Windows accounts? That's not going to have an impact on them getting out of bed and considering whether this is an activity that they want to engage in for as a career. And so we've seen great First Lady engagement on this side of things, the Take It Down Act. And on the sextortion side, that just had its first arrest, I think, in Ohio, I think it was last week, which is a tremendous achievement. And so this is rolling forward actively, and you should expect that there will be more execution and action in line with our strategic goals soon.
Will that include more cyber executive orders from the president?
I think that's the case. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything particular you want to preview there that we might see in the coming weeks?
Not right here, other than to say there's more coming, and we expect that it will be relatively soon.
There is a law that's set to expire at the end of the fiscal year, so end of September, that provides liability protections for companies that are voluntarily sharing information on cyber threats with the government. There has also been some conservative pushback to extending this and in debate within the Republican Party about kind of what the extension looks like. What's your level of confidence that something will, that you will be able to get another extension through Congress, just given the inability of Congress to even fund DHS?
So you're talking about CISA 2015,
Yes.
and what it does is it provides liability and antitrust protection for industry to share information regarding incidents with the government. It's vital. It provides stability and protection for industry that's important. It gets to something that the administration is very focused on, and the president's been very focused on, which is direct industry engagement. We are trying to build a relationship with industry. You all oversee, or private industry oversees and maintains critical infrastructure sectors and its operations. Daily life in America isn't run on these networks by the government, it's run by the private sector. And so to have a system where the private sector gets whacked by the Chinese or the Russians or whomever, and the US government turns around with a compliance checklist and hits them again, isn't form following function. And anytime that's the case, the system's going to break down. The function here should be the protection of daily life in America for American citizens. And anything that is a friction point on that needs to be focused on and removed so that we can get into a relationship where information is flowing in both directions. Industry needs to understand what the government is seeing and what the government priorities are. We need to understand your resources, your priorities, and the assets that you need protecting. And in order to do that, that liability protection has to be in place. So we want to see a clean, long-term extension of that liability. I'm confident that we can get there. I think the stakes are very high in this regard. And I'm sure that at the end of the day, people will do the right thing for the country.
Well, I'm not out of questions, but we're out of time.
Oh,
So thank you so much.
Thank you all. And to the extent that you are in industry, I want to make clear, please reach out and engage us. We will be very responsive, and we're looking for that engagement. So thank you for everything you've done so far.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Please welcome Franz Pasha of Verizon and Justin B. Smith of Semaphore.
Good morning. There he is. Good morning. Welcome to this session. I think it's a particularly interesting and distinctive session because for those of you who are following companies in America and around the world and CEOs and the complexity that we talk about, there's sort of a new sort of consigliere emerging in the field of in the C-suite area, a new, almost a kind of a new sort of super advisor, frankly, who is looking after the multitude of complicated stakeholders that companies now need to face. And Franz Pasha actually is really one of the leading practitioners of this field. He's the Executive Vice President of Corporate Affairs at Verizon, which is one of the biggest companies in America. But he's also spent several decades working at other great institutions. So welcome, Franz. And thank you for your partnership at Semaphore World Economy. So Chief Corporate Affairs Officer. This used to be called Chief Communications Officer in many companies, but it's now a much larger role in response to the changed environment. And so tell us about that role and why it's important and how you do it and so on.
Well, I appreciate being here, and congratulations on drawing this. I mean, what a success and an extraordinary accomplishment in such a short time for Semaphore. So
thank you, Franz.
Thanks for including me. So, I've talked about this a lot over the years, so I wouldn't say this is so brand new, but I think it is increasingly relevant that corporate affairs has become one of the functions that has a seat at the CEO's table and is an important advisory function and counselor to the CEO and the full leadership team.
But it's a bigger seat than it's been in the
that's
past,
right.
Yeah.
No, that's right.
I mean, it's been around for a while, but it's now maybe it's 2 seats closer to the CEO, next to the CFO now.
I'm not going to say where because that would be indiscreet. But it's a seat. It's a seat.
Important seat.
But essentially, what's happened, I think, over time is that as things have moved faster, and as communications has become, much more distributed around all the different stakeholders of companies, that there really is no way to work directly with one set of stakeholders without working and managing the relationships with all the stakeholders of a company. And to do that effectively, you've got to have the ability to think about your communications to your customers, to your shareholders, to your employees, and also to your regulators and to the media, and often at multi-levels of organizations and also geographically dispersed. Often it's at the federal level, national level, and the state level, also all around the world at both levels of national and local. And that complexity of how information moves around that full network of stakeholders means that inside the company, you've got to have a consolidated and strategic way to think about that stakeholder engagement. And so corporate affairs typically will bring together the government relations and often public policy, sometimes regulatory policy, communications, reputation, risk management, internal communications, because employees are a critical stakeholder, as well as social impact, responsible business, ESG, and very often, if companies have foundations or research arms, that part of the world. So it's a way to unify the stakeholder engagement and provide a strategic lens for the company that a CEO can rely on.
And is it effectively, what the big theme this week, of course, is this permanent sense of uncertainty that CEOs are feeling. I mean, I've heard so many times the importance of admitting that you don't know what's going to happen is now sort of the mantra of CEOs. And so is this role kind of related to that idea?
I think corporate affairs teams and the leaders of those teams can uniquely bring to bear information and data and a sense of audiences and dynamics that they can bring to the CEO and the other leaders of the company in a way that helps address some of that uncertainty and sort of be able to identify different pathways, different scenarios, and how the different stakeholders of the company are thinking about that. And I think that's very, very helpful. Sometimes there's a clear path and you're in a position to come in and say, having done this work, here's the direction we advise. And sometimes you really have to say, most often, there are a lot of things that can happen here, but here are the 5 different most likely scenarios, and here is how we think our stakeholders will react to this and respond.
All right, so let's get right into the reality of what you're facing every day. Yeah. AI at Verizon. Obviously, I think front and center is this trade-off between the implementation, the adoption, and obviously the impact on employees and what it's going to mean. Tell us a bit about how, from your position, you're advising Dan Schulman, your CEO, who actually will be here, I think, later today.
That's right, yes. So look, AI transformation has to be led at every level of the company, but it starts with the CEO, and the CEO's message to the company and the employees that we are in the age of AI, and we've got to get our minds around it and our arms around it, and everybody has to become familiar and expert in AI, and that as we transform the company, we all need to see our role in that transformation. From the corporate affairs perspective, this is a full-out partnership initiative. So I need to partner with the head I need to partner with the head of HR. I need to partner with the head of legal, with all the business units and the technology teams to be able to deliver change across a huge company at every dimension. So some of it is change management work that our team will do. Some of it is going to be all of the direct communications that have to take place as people sort of work on the development and the progress. Some of it is being able to help the company and all the parts of the company translate the change that's taking place to customers and to shareholders and to regulators and local elected officials. Because as companies change, you have to bring the world with you.
But it just seems like AI is like the sort of the Godzilla example of a stakeholder management complex. So if you do the stakeholder mapping on AI implementation, I mean, what does that look like?
Well, you can't think of it as Godzilla. You have to look at it as at least I hope my team believes me when I tell them it's the opportunity of a lifetime.
Yeah, I just meant something big and intimidating.
No, but this kind of change management work and this kind of creative and organic change is what you prepare for all of your career. Because the work we do is going to contribute to where our company, ends up in 2 or 3 years. And for corporate affairs professionals, you want to have that kind of impact in your work, and you want to be able to be part of the strategic guidance and be part of the future of the company. So I think it is an immense stakeholder engagement exercise, and the work's already begun at most big companies. And I think part of it is to not let it be overwhelming, but to let it be, you have to be both disciplined and creative and aware of how each team is progressing in the work that they're doing, and to be as, for our team, be a fantastic partner to all the parts of the organization.
And also, I mean, what we've heard this week over and over on the AI question is, CEOs have taken the AI accountability. After a couple of years of maybe not being pleased with ROI and implementation, the CEOs are the chief AI officers, and I guess in your role, you're tasked with implementing that vision, that implementation from the CEO. So is that mostly a communications externally and internally thing, or is it a government relations? How you?
I think it's all of those things. I don't think, for us anyway, we can pull apart what is that kind of direct stakeholder engagement and what are comms is part of it. But it's also working directly with all of our internal stakeholders right now and then external. But I would say that it's for sure CEO-led, but it has to be the full leadership team that takes this on. And I think that's an important part of the message that our CEO is delivering, and I think it's we're seeing that playing out, and that's why I keep coming back to this notion that leadership teams have to really have an integrated approach to get this done.
Just quick last question, because we're out of time. How do you talk about Verizon's brand these days in this context? I mean, Verizon's obviously such a ubiquitous player. I imagine everyone in this room is at least maybe a good portion are customers. Talk about the Verizon brand in 2026.
We're very proud of the brand. We are very proud of the connectivity and the network we provide and the kind of service we provide our customers. But we also are building trust, and we want to be the most trusted brand. So we think about it in terms of trust and what we can do to serve our customers in ways that they continue to rely upon us and feel great about being Verizon customers.
Well, great. Well, Semaphore World Economy, we're trying to build a very trusted environment for smart conversations. So, Franz, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Please help join me in thanking Franz.
Very good.
Please welcome Deco Idekabar of Indeed and Recruit Holdings and Clay Chandler of Semaphore.
Thanks, everyone. And Deco, welcome. We're delighted to have you here with us. I wonder if we could start just for people who may not be familiar with Recruit and Indeed and what you do. Just tell us a little bit about your company and what service you provide.
Yeah, I guess nobody knows Recruit, but Recruit Holdings is actually a relatively old Japanese company. We have 70 years history in Japan, and but now majority of revenue is actually coming from outside Japan, and we are running Indeed.com and Glassdoor.com and other like HR related services globally, and roughly we have 550 million job seekers and more than 3.3 million employees are using our website. And we're making actually 27 hires per minute globally. And that's like almost every 2 seconds.
Wow.
Oh, we made a hire now.
Fantastic. Well, Recruit is an extraordinary company, and it has changed under your leadership. I mean, you led the acquisition of Indeed. You sort of picked up and moved to Austin, which is, I think, one of the most remarkable Japanese executive journeys that I know of. And it's turned out to be very, very profitable for you. But we're at a moment when technology is changing very rapidly. A lot of discussion here about AI and what it means for exactly what you do, which is help people to find jobs. There is this kind of, you can get on TikTok and find a zillion podcasts that are full of doom and gloom about how AI is coming for everyone's jobs. Particularly, and we talked about this in our roundtable yesterday, people who are in service jobs, lawyers, business consultants, that sort of thing, anybody in accounting. What's your view on that? Do you think that pessimism is warranted?
Yeah, everybody is asking about how AI is impacting job market, labor market, like to me all the time. But what I want to mention today is, actually what's happening in all developed countries, including, European countries and US, what is happening is big demographic change, aging labor market. That is actually way bigger impact than AI impact today. Of course, people are talking about AI. I know I'm a tech guy. I love talking about AI, but I just want to revisit about demographic big change. Our new research showed that in the US, we're going to have 20 million less workers in next 15 years. That's like 5% less workers. And 80% of that is due to aging population. We will have more retired people than getting a new workers. And just 20% will be triggered by AI replacement. So I understand that people are talking about AI, but I'm originally from Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Japan has been struggling to have a low birth rate for like 20 years.
Yeah.
And Japan is having a decreasing population, but Japan, fortunately, unfortunately, I don't know, but had a low labor participation rate from the female segment. And as a result, Japan is increasing the labor participation rate from female. As a result, for the last 20 years, relatively stable number of working population. But in the US, it's happening in Germany, UK, all developed countries, it's going to be faster.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why, what's happening literally is there's so many open positions, construction jobs, plumber, healthcare jobs,
mm-hmm.
and electricians. It's such a fundamental in-person jobs, but we don't have a good pipeline to fill these positions. I think when we think about society, we need these workers, but people are talking a lot about AI changes. It will take 20 years
mm-hmm.
to replace plumbing jobs.
Yeah. It's interesting, you mentioned Japan getting women into the labor force as a buffer, and that's a story that I think is not widely understood globally. Japan has made extraordinary progress in getting women into work. It's got female participation rates in the labor force higher than a lot of even Scandinavian countries.
Yeah.
And you can argue about whether the salaries are fair, whether the jobs are senior enough, but in the US, we don't have that buffer because we've already got a relatively high female participation rate. And we now have a situation where immigration, which was our buffer, is becoming a lot more restrictive. Do you see that as having, sort of intensifying this shortage of workers problem that you're seeing?
Yes. So, in the US, 1 out of 4 healthcare workers are immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
1 out of 5 nurses are immigrants.
Mm.
And we don't have a good pipeline. And, even if we got the new immigrants today, it will take years to be a good pipeline of skilled labor force. So that's why it's actually, when we think about demographic data, these immigrants data, it's actually relatively easy to predict what will happen. Of course, AI, it's very difficult to predict what will happen, but the labor force and demographic data, I think we should have the good view what will happen for the next 15 years.
So you and I have children who are kind of 18, 19, 20, right?
Yeah.
And I talked to my son, who's in college now, and he's kind of looking at all these changes. It's like, Dad, what job can I do that AI won't displace me? What do you tell, even your own kids, or what do you more generally tell young people who are just at the bottom, starting that pipeline and beginning their journey into the workforce?
Yeah, so that is a great question. I have 20 years old, 18 years old girls having to, teenager girls are really tough, by the way. But anyway, so they asked me, the same question, and like, for example, like my friend, boy, he was saying like, hey, I decided to study more cybersecurity because cybersecurity is immune by AI attack and blah blah blah. And last week, Claude Mythos happened, like cybersecurity now. Everything is talking about AI. So it's just 1 week, everything changed. So what I'm thinking is like, okay, what I'm telling my daughters is like, hey, I don't know what kind of skills are protected or immune from the AI changes, but the most important thing I just want them to have is like more like a, mindset or mental motto. I don't know, like that, like there will be many changes. And if you can have a mindset to enjoy changes, hey, there's a change, I'm going to study. I'm going to study new things. I'm going to try to get the new skills. Then you can be more flexible. But if you're having like, oh, there's a new thing. I need to study this. I need to study that. There's a change. I think it's not only kids, because what I'm thinking is like, I understand that. Some people told me like, oh, this guy said there will be 20% unemployment rate, 15%. I just don't believe that. Because again, as I said, there are so many open positions, in-person jobs, and I'm not saying that there's no pain.
Yeah.
Same as the current, new grads. There's a huge gap between we trained kids. As a parent, I told kids like, hey, you should study more, get into the better school. But we trained everybody to be a white-collar job.
Right.
And the actual demand for hiring right now is not having a good fit, like healthcare, plumber, or whatever.
So people need to be kind of more open-minded about the kind of careers that they
so I think we will still have huge demand for these jobs for the next 15 years, 20 years. But there will be people who have to be forced, who will be forced to change to get the new skill. Yeah. So reskilling as a whole society for all leaders, all CEOs, we have to be responsible for that. And I really want to push it.
Let me ask you specifically about where what you do at Indeed, which is helping people with the process of searching for those jobs. And I mentioned this at lunch yesterday. Again, my own son sort of looks at all the tools that AI provides him now for generating a CV and communicating and applying for internships with companies or whatever it is. He says AI is great for that, but it's also terrifying because everybody has it. And so, what's happening is that everyone is flooding, the system with applications to companies. Companies are overwhelmed. They have to turn to using AI to digest and interpret all of these CVs. And he's like, how do I navigate that? Do you have suggestions for people? I mean, is it becoming an arms race of sorts?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think now it's a great time for all CEOs to think about the speed of the change, especially for the, most of the time the HR team are relatively risk-averse or not like marketing team. Right. So, but the job seekers, especially younger generation, everybody's using AI to improve resumes. Right. Like all resumes are great. Right. Looks so fantastic. But how about our internal AI team, like HR team or talent acquisition team, they're doing the same thing what they did 5 years ago. So that's why they have to be having better AI technology to improve the real cost per hire. Because all CEOs to think about what's the real cost per hire. Because okay, how many people do we have in the HR team, talent acquisition team? Because for example, we're sending more than 100,000 applications to more than 2,000 employers in the world.
Right.
Probably, you guys, sometimes we're sending more than 1 million applications. Think about it. Your team is spending 5 minutes, let's say 5 minutes, to check one resume. It's like millions of hours your team is spending. And that's why we need to redesign how we're trying to find the best fit. And we need to think about seriously how to use AI tools to improve the productivity.
Is that good for your business, or is that bad for you, the fact that everybody can send out so many CVs and applications?
Our mission is we help people get jobs. As I said, we're helping 20 hires per minute.
Right.
And I really believe hiring processes should be easier, simpler, faster, because it's just good for the society. The cost of changing job is a society's cost. It should be so easy to get a new job. And as I said, for the next 15 years, we're going to see massive reskilling and changing the jobs type of situation for many, many generations. So from the different types of people and different types of segments. So that's why it's so important to have a bunch of AI tools to support job seekers and employers to find a better fit. I think we can do the better job with AI tools.
And what does that imply about our education system? Should we be changing the way that we prepare people?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question, because sometimes I feel like, especially like when I talk to German people or Japanese people,
right.
These countries have a little bit different mindset for the in-person type of jobs or essential workers type of jobs. But in the US, especially they're not making that much money. And what I'm saying is more like how can we re-evaluate these very important for the society type of jobs to be valuable? And so I think more like how can I say? Education, of course, we need to change the education system, but at the same time, how can we have the mindset to be respect for all jobs?
Right.
Not the jobs which is making like $1 million, you know what I mean?
Right. So, for example, if you were sort of eyeing being in professional services and thought you were going to be able to go out to the workforce and be a lawyer and start at $200,000 or something like that, to recognize that maybe this is a world where it's by being an electrician that you can make $150,000, $200,000, and trying to be a lawyer is not going to be that rewarding anymore.
Just think about even the last 50 years, 100 years, all society, we didn't have that much 20 times, 30 times difference between software engineers and farmer. We didn't have it.
Yeah.
But last 50 years, we changed a lot. We pushed a lot with the capitalism. But when we think about society, I don't want to wait for 2 months when I find the water leaking.
Right.
But that's happening now in the US.
Wow, so it's a strange new world, and it will be very interesting to see how this technology evolves and how companies and employers navigate the implications of the new technology. Deco, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Please welcome John Waldron of Goldman Sachs and Shelley Banjo of Semaphore.
Hey, John.
How are you?
Good. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to jump right in. You guys had earnings this week. Your boss came on and said that enthusiasm from corporate clients is a bit shaky. How does that manifest? What happens to all these big IPOs that people were sort of counting on for 2026?
Well, I think confidence is still pretty good. If you put it in a historical context, confidence is still pretty good. Obviously, the longer the war goes, the more people get cautious about their own business and therefore thinking about whether they're capital raising or doing M&A transactions. That starts to weigh on them. So I think what David was saying is that sentiment is an important thing, and sentiment gets weaker as the war goes on because there's more unpredictability and uncertainty. But I still think we're going to have a very strong period of capital markets activity and M&A activity.
You think all the big IPOs that, SpaceX, OpenAI, Anthropic, all of those are actually going to come to play?
I'm not going to comment on individual names, but we're pretty constructive on the backlog and the pipeline beyond the backlog for IPOs, other capital markets transactions. We've had a very good wave of large M&A transactions complemented by financings of those transactions. Think Unilever, McCormick, the Cisco transaction, but a number of these larger scale transactions, all with financing attached. The financings have gone very well. So I think that the marketplace is still quite healthy.
What's your time frame? Peter Orszag was here the other day, called it a roadrunner moment, like we're just about to jump off the cliff, but we haven't looked down yet. Bessent, completely different worldview. Where do you fall?
I'm pretty constructive on the U.S. economy. I think the economy, this is an economy that has been predicted to be in trouble for a long time and shows extraordinary resilience, and I still see that resilience. I think the data we see, certainly in the first quarter results that have come out by, for a number of companies, the data is strong. Now that's obviously a bit more backward looking. But I don't see any real evidence of material weakness in the economy. There's definitely concerning signals. The consumer confidence index is a concerning signal. It feels to me like consumers are dipping more into savings. They're absorbing energy price shock right now by spending more and using savings to buffer that.
And putting more on their credit cards.
That can't go on for ad infinitum. So there'll be a limit to that. But I think this economy is much stronger than the narrative suggests. So we remain pretty constructive.
But the war, if it goes to what, July, September, what's your sort of stake in the ground there in terms of when things start to
I think
worry
that
you?
I don't know. I frankly don't think any of us are smart enough to pick the time frame. Longer is worse, of course. But I think if you get through the summer and we haven't opened the Strait of Hormuz and we've got oil prices that are climbing into the hundreds, you're going to start to see demand destruction. How much demand destruction is yet to be seen. We've got our own forecasts of that. Our baseline forecast coming into the war was like high twos GDP. So there's a fair bit of room between high twos GDP and an actual recession. And I think we're quite a ways from that at this point.
You guys did a really good, crushed it on sort of equities, but you had some trouble there with fixed income. Other banks did better. Is there a bigger issue here on the fixed income side?
No, in the historical realm of Goldman Sachs, it was actually a very good fixed income quarter. In the period of time when you have a lot of volatility around rates in particular and commodities, you can get in traffic where things don't go your way at any given moment in time. You have to end the quarter at a certain date and you show what happened. If you look at it in the fullness of time, I have no concerns about our FICC business. Our FICC business is very strong. And I would say, the other thing that's important about Goldman Sachs is had we had that kind of a FICC quarter 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago, we wouldn't have produced a 20% ROE. This is now a quite resilient business and firm where we produce a 20% ROE with not our best FICC quarter. Shows you a lot of the dynamism and resilience in the firm and the durability in the firm, which I think is an important part of our strategic, has been an important part of our strategic ambition, and we continue to move in that direction.
I think Bessent surprised me a little bit earlier this week saying, we're going to maybe take a little bit more of a wait and see approach on rates, given that his boss, would like us to cut rates a little bit. Yeah. What's your take on that?
My take is taking a wait and see approach is prudent. I think that the Fed obviously has a dual mandate. You've now got to worry a bit more about the growth side of the mandate, the employment side of the mandate, to your earlier question. So it strikes me that this is a moment to get more data, wait and watch, and it's pretty hard right now to see through the fog of what's going to happen in Iran and make a predictive decision. So I think waiting and watching is a prudent decision.
Did you think that's a good thing for someone like Kevin Warsh?
What a good thing for Kevin Warsh?
To sort of wait and see approach. Does it sort of give him sort of more room to
Well,
go?
I think we should wait and let's get Kevin confirmed, and we can just determine what he'll do. But whoever the chair of the Federal Reserve is at this point, I assume is going to look at the situation and say watching is intelligent.
Do you think that's not going to happen?
It's not a moment to be ambitiously making a strong judgment one way or the other.
Do you think it's not going to happen, getting Warsh confirmed?
No, I would be optimistic about that. I think the president's chosen the person he wants to lead the Federal Reserve, and I'd be optimistic that will prevail.
If it drags on and we sort of have this sort of game of chicken between Tillis and Trump, what's that going to do for someone like you running Goldman and your sort of confidence in the Fed?
Well, what we care most about is the independence of the Federal Reserve and their ability to make monetary policy decisions, independent of political interference. And so that's the thing that we're most focused on.
Great. Do you think that we are sort of heading back into a moment of quantitative easing?
I think to your earlier question, we need to see what the picture looks like from a growth standpoint and an inflation standpoint. I mean, I think the Fed is increasingly in a more difficult position because it was more clear coming into this year that we were more likely going to be in an easing bias. That's less clear now. And I think that we haven't talked about AI. It's amazing we got halfway through here and we haven't talked about AI yet. But obviously, that's another factor that if I were at the Federal Reserve, I'd be watching very carefully is what is the productivity impact, what's the employment impact, all very much unclear at this point. But I think that the good thing about the Federal Reserve is they have a dual mandate. The tougher thing is they have a dual mandate, and that navigating that is right now, I think, going to be increasingly complex.
Let's talk about AI since you brought it up. Tell us a little bit about how you guys are actually using it on a day-to-day basis.
So we've got essentially, I'd say, a kind of two-pronged strategy. Prong number one is to make it available to our people, to allow them to start to learn, experiment, understand, maybe overcome their fears. And so we have something we call GS AI Assistant, which is our own internal platform, which allows us to give access to the leading models that everybody now knows very well to our people in a governed state. And we've been promoting that experimentation in the firm for some time now. We're now close to 40,000 users per month, which is darn near close to all of our employees. So we're seeing very good adoption and experimentation. Our prompts per month are going up. I think it's almost 2 million prompts per month now. So we're starting to see very good take-up, if you will. That's important for us because we want people to feel comfortable with the tooling. The second part of the strategy is actually to go inside the firm and figure out how to make ourselves more efficient, more productive, and then how to deliver better solutions for clients. And so we have a whole number of use cases that we're focused on in that part of the strategy where we're working with the Anthropics and the Googles and the OpenAIs of the world to help us figure out in these, what I'll call human assembly line kind of processes in the firm. If you think about like if we were an automotive company back in the day and we were running an automotive assembly line, there's a lot of human touch points. There's not very many robots, in our infrastructure. We'll be using digital agents, in a much more profound way, kind of like you would use robots in a Tesla factory. And that's the big opportunity for us to unlock a bunch of efficiency. In the context of doing that, we can also make our engagement with our clients materially different, whether it's in our quantitative investing business or in Marquee, where we talk to institutional clients about analytical events in the markets and how we can think about the predictive nature of what might happen going forward. There's any number of areas where we can do a lot to make our client engagement much stronger, much more robust, a lot more value add. And early signs are very encouraging. So I'm very optimistic, but it takes time. And the last thing I would say is for companies like ours as big enterprises, the two big long poles in the tent are data, because most of us don't have clean, structured data all over the place. And so there's a lot of migration to more data lakehouse, structured capability where you can actually let the models do what they should be doing. And the second is cultural change. Right, you have to get people to rethink the way we do things.
And cybersecurity,
I imagine. And
cyber
also obviously is all, but cyber's not a new thing. Cyber's always front of mind for us, and obviously, with Mythos and more recent developments, it becomes even more, front of mind. But I think that data and cultural change elements, those are important elements that, in my mind, mean the enterprises will go a little slower to a lot slower versus what the models can deliver, and that's where you get a little bit of that supply-demand gap where the drive for compute power is seemingly insatiable, but the demand picture in enterprise will be slower. It doesn't mean that they won't ultimately meet an equilibrium, but there'll be a slower uptake as enterprises get themselves untracked to do this kind of thing.
Can you tell us about the Bessent meeting with Mythos? Like, why did he bring in all the banks to talk about it?
I don't have a comment on the meeting, but I think it's a good thing that the U.S. government is focused on, having a discussion with the private sector, whether it's banking, energy, pharma, et cetera, to make sure that we're being thoughtful about how these capabilities are being utilized and that we're thinking about national security in the right way.
Switching gears a little bit, you've been pretty involved with China and China business for a long time. We're about a month out from what is supposed to be a trip, President Trump and different CEOs to China. Bessent talked a little bit about a potential board of trade. What would that look like? And what would someone like you or someone like a Goldman Sachs be interested in that kind of thing?
I don't know that there's enough details on this notion of a board of trade to have a particularly acute response to that. But I think that the commentary around having more understanding between the two countries of how we can trade together is a positive step in the right direction. This is obviously going to be a very complex relationship. It's a great power rivalry, but the countries are very intertwined, and obviously supply chains have been built over long periods of time. And having, I think, just a tariff policy without a more nuanced, sophisticated approach is not really ultimately the way to run the relationship. And so I think that having some notion of how we can actually create some trade between the countries is the right. I promote that idea. I think it's a good idea. How exactly that's going to come together is still, I think, pretty far from clear.
What's something both sides can agree on?
In terms of trade, well, there's plenty of areas. I think the Chinese buying. I just came out of a meeting on the Hill, much of which was focused on soybeans and corn. I think having the Chinese buy more of our farm products would be quite helpful. So there's any number of areas, in farming and agriculture. You can think about airplanes. There's tons of areas where pharmaceuticals. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for trade, and the big question will be, where do you draw the national security ring? And how do you protect what's national security for both countries, and what is really on the outer, skirts of that ring, and what can be done that's less national security sensitive and good for both economies.
Last thing I want to ask you about is private credit. There's been a lot of focus on liquidity and some of the retail investors, but is the bigger picture really is there an actual credit problem that we are facing at this moment?
So I think obviously there's been an enormous amount of focus on private credit, and I think anytime you have an asset class in financial markets that grows exponentially over a long period of time, it deserves attention. And there's any number of historical examples like that. A couple things to say. One is, we're not going to have a big problem in private credit or public credit, in my estimation, without an economic problem, right? So it starts with the economy. It starts with economic growth and the performance of the general economy. So if your question on Iran, coming all the way back to that, results in economic degradation, we have mini stagflation, or worse, a recession with even some stagflation, you're going to have problems in credit. There'll be problems in public credit. There'll be problems in private credit. And what we're going to learn, if and when that happens, is who had better underwriting standards, who was biased to doing more versus biased to doing less, who had more exposure to the sectors that are most pronounced in the downturn. That's going to become clear. And I have no doubt in my mind that will become clear if and when we have that kind of an economic cycle. But we don't have that right now. So I think the focus right now in private credit is mostly on the liquidity factor in retail, which is worth paying attention to because there's been enormous growth. I think private credit, direct lending in the U.S. is probably a $1.7 trillion or thereabouts market. About 20% of that is in retail hands. Call it $220 or $230 billion of NAV. And those retail investors, I think, have the perception of more liquidity than is the reality. And so you could have, in situations where there's a sense that there's undercurrents of trouble in private credit, you could have more redemption pressure where people want their money back and there are gates that are going up because that's the way the system works. And there'll be more pressure. And I think we will see more of that. And I think,
the gates were always there, right?
The gates were there, but I would say that not everybody has marketed their product as clearly as certainly we would like to see, with the clarity that this is really not a liquid product. It's not semi-liquid. It's really illiquid.
Yeah, let's ban the semi-liquid thing.
It doesn't mean that it's a bad product. It doesn't mean that it's not suitable for certain portfolios. But it has to be suitable with the context that it's an illiquid product. And so in our own firm, we tend to be more institutionally oriented than retail oriented. But when we go out and talk to retail for our own products, we tend to talk about it as an illiquid alternative asset, which can generate lots of good absolute return and is a good ballast in the portfolio, but you have to size it accordingly to your liquidity needs. And that I think that has not been as well articulated as I think it should have been, and we probably will pay some price for that in the system. But I think for it to be a big, big problem, you need an economic problem.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much.
Appreciate the time.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Please welcome Shelley Lyford of West Health, Glenn Tullman of Transcarent, and Justin B. Smith of Semaphore.
Good day, everyone. Lovely to be here. So we are going to have a fascinating conversation with two leaders who are working in the healthcare space and approaching America's healthcare crisis from two different angles. One, building the technology to put patients back in control of their care, and the other fighting to make that care affordable enough to actually reach them. So really delighted to welcome Shelley Lyford, the CEO of West Health, and Glenn Tullman, the CEO of Transcarent. Glenn's also a serial entrepreneur who has just done some of the most amazing things in the health space. I wish we had 45 minutes to have this conversation, but I want to ask you both a question, because you're both here because of your, I think, deep personal commitment to democratizing healthcare. What does it mean to you, and how is your work advancing this mission? Shelley?
Well, Justin, first of all, thank you so much. A big thanks to Semaphore. Amazing meeting, 3 years in. And I really appreciate you shining a light on healthcare. I think this is the first year, and it's something that's very important to Glenn and me and to everyone in this room. We all touch healthcare in different ways. And when I think about democratizing healthcare, I think about dignity, I think about access, and I think about agency. And I think those three things are missing in our system today. We have a system that's very hard to navigate. We have a system where people feel, patients feel, families feel they are not in control. They don't have agency. And it is very expensive on top of everything else. So at West Health, we think about those things every day. And we think about it, what are the main drivers of cost in healthcare and who consumes healthcare. And that takes us to a population that is growing in the United States, a 65 and over population. In less than 5 years, we'll have more people over the age of 60 than under the age of 18, the first time in the history of the world. And it's an interesting time for us to start reimagining healthcare and fixing a system that is broken.
Before we go to Glenn, I think I just applaud you for this mission, because as you describe that, I think personally we all feel this. The scale of the challenge that you're taking on is just seems so large and sort of daunting in many ways. And so as we talk, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you're overcoming that daunting feeling.
Right.
Obviously, you're doing it through entrepreneurship, but what about your personal journey on democratizing healthcare? What does that mean to you?
Well, I think as we look at healthcare today, if you ask people, both in the U.S. and actually around the world, what they say is healthcare is more confusing, more complex, and more costly than it's ever been. And it's getting worse, not better. And that's men and women, younger people and older people, all ethnicities, foreign and domestic. And so the question is, how can we be spending so much money?
Wait, does everyone agree with that statement? Yeah?
Does anybody think it's easy and less expensive? So the question is, how did we get there? And in every other industry, we've used technology to address each of those issues. And we at Transcarent think of health and care, and I separate health and care because today we have a sick care system. And what we should focus on is, how do we keep people healthy? And then when they need care, how do we get them that care effectively? And we've been given this gift called AI. And so how can we use technology and AI to make it easier for people to access high quality, affordable health and care? And that's really the objective. And so what we'd like to do is make accessing your health care as easy as it is, for everything else you do on your phone. So whether it's banking or whether it's travel or whether it's transportation, and I was talking to someone recently and they were offended because they were using a rideshare program and they had to wait 6 minutes. And I thought, when did we get to the point where waiting for 6 minutes? And I was teaching a class at Stanford not long ago, and I mentioned that you hail a cab, and a hand goes up of a young 18-year-old, and he said, "Excuse me, sir." And when they say "sir," you know you're old. And he said, "What does that mean, hail a cab?" And at first I thought maybe he was kidding, and then I realized he was serious, and he had grown up in a world where you expect any car you want to appear instantly, any place, and that's the expectation. But in healthcare, we don't expect any of that. And the goal is, how do we change our thinking to get 24/7 access, to get instant information? So now in any language you can talk to your phone and say, "I want an endocrinologist who's female and speaks Spanish in Oakland, California," and instantly that information will appear and say it's covered by your employer or it's not covered, and here's what the cost is.
So is one sort of not soundbite, but precise summation be, the situation's so bleak, as you described the current situation, everyone agreeing with it, but AI is a sort of a kind of a magical solution that may solve all this?
Well, it's interesting.
Just very quickly, because we're going to go to...
It's a bright spot. It's absolutely a bright spot.
Yeah, I think in many areas AI is a challenge in healthcare. We don't have enough doctors.
Right.
We don't have enough access.
Right.
And so it can do what we're worried about in other areas. It can actually help, used appropriately, and it's not going to replace doctors. It's going to make them more efficient and not have them.
But it's our best chance for a rapid solution to this huge crisis.
Right.
So
I think it will supplement, as you said, Glenn. And in fact, at 4:30 today, West Health is going to be unveiling our new research poll with Gallup on AI in healthcare.
Oh, fantastic.
And so definitely invite everyone to go to that. But the findings, and, I don't mean to let the cat out of the bag, but...
but you will. Go ahead.
But I'm going to. I think what we found, taking the pulse of America, is that people are using AI in most cases to supplement their healthcare, and also they're using it to replace healthcare because they cannot afford the doctors. They cannot make the appointment. There are all these things preventing easy navigation, and so that is something that we really need to be wary of.
And that's your question about
what's stopping us from actually building a system that's centered on living well and instead of just reacting to illness, which is one of the core problems, right?
Right. So I think the incentives are perverse in healthcare. So we, as Glenn aptly said earlier, we have a sick care system. We do not have a healthcare system. Prevention is not prioritized unless, Glenn, we use new different words, right?
This is the power of words,
This
right?
is the power of words.
Okay.
And so, Glenn, I think the anecdote that you shared with us backstage is really important here.
Well, first of all, West is doing great work, and you're leading the way in prevention, but we had a company, so we also have a venture fund called Seven Wire, and 3 years ago we saw a company come in. It wasn't doing very well, and it was a prevention company in healthcare, and we declined funding. And here, 3 years later, fast forward, I see this company, and I'm listening to this pitch, and I'm saying to myself, I know these guys. I've seen these guys before. And it's a longevity company, and it is knocking the cover off the ball on longevity. Everybody wants to buy it. I realize it's the exact same company, and they've simply rebranded this. And so we all want longevity, but prevention is not something. So words matter. This is your business.
Yes.
Words
longevity
matter.
Is the new prevention.
And that's really how we talk about this. And what we're selling out there, selling in the way of keeping people healthy, is this new mindset that we have to create.
Fascinating. So Glenn, I mean, your company's obviously doing all sorts of innovative things, but when you think about kind of like health inclusion and making sure that these new AI and technology solutions can actually support, can actually democratize healthcare, support everyday people, and older adults, as opposed to the fears that AI is obviously going to kind of exacerbate existing economic disparities. How are you approaching that? And how are you going to try to guarantee that?
So when I first moved out to Silicon Valley, people said, what we do in Silicon Valley is we make it easy for people to do what they want to do and what we want them to do. We'll talk about that second piece later. So one, how do you make it easy? So first, when we deploy our systems, there's no training required. And it reminds me, my youngest son was playing an RPG, a role-playing game, and I wanted to be the good dad, so I walked down and I said, where are the directions? And he looked up and he said, Dad, nothing smart has directions anymore. You just start. And so I said, what if we built a product that you could pick up your phone, it would look at you, you'd look at it, it would log you on, and you would talk to it and you'd ask it any question you had. What's my benefit? What should I do? I hurt my knee. Where should I go? Can I talk to a doctor right now? In any language. And it would instantly not just give you a list, but it would agentively connect you to that solution. And that's what we built, that's what we're doing. But that's what the future looks like. So it's not, so we're deploying
and that'll be available
companies.
to the broader population.
So today
at
we're doing that with large
cost?
self-insured employers. But the goal is when you do it, why couldn't you use that everywhere for anyone? And that's really our goal. And the goal isn't to, we hear about bending the cost curve. We should talk about breaking the cost curve,
Right.
which is why should the cost not come down dramatically to access the information that you need about your health?
That's
So,
right.
last question. Healthcare is so personal. We've got a room full of really influential people, policy folks, business leaders. What's, Shelley and Glenn, your advice to people here who would like to join this mission of democratizing healthcare? What would you ask them to do?
Well, I would say, we're kind of retooling the plane as we fly it. We need to move to value-based care. We need to align payment with the right incentives. I think that's, of course, number one. And we need to understand we have a very changing demographic in our country that we're going to embrace. Aging is not broken, the system is. And there are some just very smart policy changes that we can make. We can prop up better systems of care where we're moving data and not people. We can embrace telehealth and AI in a very smart, efficient way while keeping a human touch. And we truly will be able to care for more people at a much higher level.
And Glenn, what can close us out?
What she said, and I would say as leaders, you need to be unreasonable. And that is the status quo isn't working.
That's right.
We all know this. This is too important to leave, and you should require exactly what you get in every other area of your life in your healthcare interactions. And that means 24/7 instant access, lower cost, not the same cost, don't settle because you don't have to anymore. And those solutions are available and you should push for them because it's too important for us to settle.
Good. And longevity is the new prevention.
Longevity is the new prevention.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Please welcome Daniel Heath of Bath & Body Works and Gina Chua of Semaphore.
So, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So you're a honest-to-goodness bricks and mortar store in an increasingly digital world. You've got, is it 2,400 stores around the world?
Right.
I think 3/4 of your revenue comes from stores, and your digital revenue is actually falling. So talk to me a little bit about what's the strategy? Where do you want to get to? I know you're in restructuring, but what's your end state look like?
Look, the strategy overall for Bath & Body Works is to be where the consumer is. You know, we don't lead with channel, we lead with the consumers. And I think I am bullish on physical retail. All the data says younger consumers are increasingly choosing physical retail. They love the experience of the store. They love the trial and discovery of a store. And it's all sleeping giant of a business. It has these amazing stores. It has incredible loyalty. And it never built an online business, because the whole reason they sort of started on the web was not to acquire new customers, but the website has acted as a catalog for store customers to replenish what they've already bought. So when I arrived at the company 10 months ago and I said, why do we only have one product, one photo per product? And the answer was because the customer already knows what it smells like. So we have not only the competitive advantage in retail, which, by the way, is very difficult to replicate. You can be a small brand on the
digital proposition is, quote, the worst I have ever seen when you
walked.
walked.
It was definitely one of the worst I've ever seen. And it's already got materially better. So we're seeing improvements week over week, quarter over quarter.
And you're moving it onto Amazon as well.
Yeah, we just moved Feb 20th onto Amazon. And again, I'll go back to the principle, which is, as a brand, you don't get to choose which channels. You go to where the customer is. It is so obvious to me that as a category leader, so in our 3 categories, which is body care, fragrance, home fragrance, soaps and sanitizers, we're the #1 market share leader in North America. Unbelievable scale. It's actually difficult for us to take share without being on Amazon, because they are so large in our category and their growth rate is so much.
Why not go direct to consumer? Why not build out the digital offering?
We're doing both.
Okay.
You know, we are building our own digital offering. It's made big strides in the last 10 months, and we've got a long way to go. We've improved both the experience side of it and the conversion side of it. We've dropped down our free shipping threshold. It's not about one or the other, it's about both.
I mean, does that mean at some point you're going to transition off Amazon while you've been build out your own?
Definitely not. There are different consumers in different channels, and there are different reasons to shop in different channels. The widest selection of Bath & Body Works products will always be available in our own channels, and we are offering at this point in time, a small selection of SKUs that we believe are best suited for the Amazon customer. And it's really interesting to see that the SKUs that have underperformed in our stores are outperforming on Amazon, which teaches me that it is truly an incremental consumer.
Sure.
And the consumer on Amazon is prepared to pay more than the consumer in our stores because they want fast, free, next day shipping.
Okay.
So it's a different journey, it's a different consumer, and we have a very broad selection of incredible products to be able to offer.
So let me pivot for a second to a subject that doesn't, I think, ordinarily come up in the course of this, which is the war in the Gulf.
Is the what, sorry?
The war in the Gulf.
Yeah, okay. It's a long way from fragrance.
It is,
yes.
and I think your supply chain is relatively insulated from this, but obviously we're seeing inflationary effects from that and from everything else. And when gas is, I was in California last week, gas is $6 a gallon. And you're essentially selling sort of affordable luxury to a segment of the market, and there's going to be less disposable income in that, and there'll be more and more companies, essentially scrambling for those dollars. What's the plan and the strategy in order to sort of try and mitigate that, to make sure you have a share of that disposable income, even as people are paying more for gas and for food and so on?
I mean, I think everyone who's sat here as part of these amazing sessions will probably take out that the macro is extremely complicated. You know, you've got large tax breaks on one hand, no tax on tips on the other, record-breaking tax rebates. You've got lowest consumer confidence in forever. You've got inflation. No one is really seeing the effect yet on the consumer, but you're right, at some point, things are going to change. That's why I love where we sit. The quality, the story about the quality of Bath & Body Works' products has not been told. We are really luxury fragrances at affordable prices. And so I do think there's an opportunity for us, even in an inflationary market, to capture consumers who are trading down, you know, as well as offering, you know, a little bit of self-care in a moment when
it's the classic lipstick story, right?
It's the classic lipstick story. But you know, the price value of our products, and it's our fault. We haven't told that story. The price value for Bath & Body Works' products is extraordinary, and shame on us for not having modernized a consumer proposition to tell that story in digital channels, in social, with influencers, through packaging, through messaging in stores. That's just not something we've done, and it's a little bit about where we've come from has stopped us doing that.
And let's talk about that, because you've said the brand is forgotten but not rejected. How do you think about rebuilding that? I mean, a lot of the brand has come through the physical stores. They're in malls. Malls are perhaps not the most vibrant part of the economy. So how do you get your brand in front of the customers that you want to build for the long term?
It's so interesting, you know, as I look back and understand where Bath & Body Works has come from. I didn't grow up in the Midwest, as you can tell, but
no.
There are brands that have fallen out of favor with consumers. There are many, and I'm sure we could all name them. And when I go around and I talk to consumers, and consumers of the brand for a long time who are no longer consumers, they say, the story goes a bit like this. I love Bath & Body Works. I remember when my mum took me in a minivan and dropped me off at the mall, and it was the first place I ever bought a first fragrance, and the first place I bought my first body lotion, and I remember I wore this fragrance when I went to my prom, and then, where did you go? I'm like, no, we're still there. It's you that stopped coming to the mall, and we stopped existing as a brand in a modern way, in digital, in social. And so we weren't rejected. I think that we were just forgotten, because the way that the company started, and it's fascinating, they never did any marketing ever, because traffic went to the mall and the brand was the experience. But in a modern world where you have to mean more than just an in-store experience, you have to be clear about who you stand for and what you stand for everywhere you are. We haven't done that. So we're not a brand that's been rejected. We're a brand that's actually deeply loved, and people have incredible nostalgia for this brand, and we just need to remind them who we are, why we exist, and what we do for them.
And so how are you doing that?
So it's wonderful.
How are you doing that?
Well, reigniting the brand is a big part of our strategy, and it's the modern brand marketing playbook. Who are we as a brand? What are the stories that we want to tell about our brand to our consumers? What is the quality of our products? Quality of our ingredients, the efficacy of our products. These are all important stories to tell, and we have a unique place in the ecosystem. I don't think people recognize that we're one of the largest beauty fragrance companies in the world, and if you ranked America's favorite fragrances by dollar value, we have 4 of those in the top 10. And yet I don't think, because we have never operated as a brand or ever sold them outside the 4 walls of our stores, maybe not everybody
So that's the story, but how are you actually reaching consumers then?
Good. So, I mean, Amazon is a good example, not just in terms of course, it's a channel to transact in, but if you look at the brand photography, if you look at the way we have positioned the product, the way we have explained the benefits, the way we have been clear about the ingredients and the cleanliness of those ingredients, a brand is a place to tell us, that the channel is a place to tell the story, and we will do that on our own site, and we will do that in our own stores, and that's starting to come to life now, but will be a much bigger impact as we move through the rest of this financial year.
So you haven't been there that long. The previous leadership had expanded into new categories, and I don't think that worked particularly well, and you've stepped back from that. What are the lessons you draw? You've sort of pulled back, as you say, into your core categories. What are the lessons you draw from that in terms of sort of expansion and how you think about what are adjacent categories that are good to get into, that perhaps are mistakes, or perhaps the execution of those that expansion was not well done?
The way I think about adjacencies in all businesses is, do you need to go into the adjacency? You know, I'm a sort of study of transformation and a study of consumer brands. I've worked at many consumer brands, and if there's plenty of growth in your core categories, I don't think you necessarily need to be looking outside. So that's the first. Okay. You know, body care, fragrance, you know, and soaps and sanitizers have been booming for the best part of 4 or 5 years. We have not taken our fair share of that. That's
well, hang on. You just said you're top 4 at the top.
We're still the number 1 in terms of share. But the market is growing faster than us. Okay. So we're losing share in our core categories. So I think the number 1 thing a business should do is maintain its position in the core categories. Then you can look at the size of an adjacency. That's another good opportunity. And then you can look at your right to win. Now, previous leaders of this company thought that it would be a great idea to go into an adjacency, let's say laundry care. It's on the surface, a very attractive segment, enormous segment for the consumer. But you have to ask yourself as well whether you have the right to win in a category like that. Not many people come to the mall and buy laundry detergent. And it is a very aggressive category. And it would take, and what happened actually was it took all the marketing and product development money away from our core categories, which meant our core categories have not kept pace with the consumer while we have been focused elsewhere. So going back to where there is strong growth, where we're the leader, where we have the right to win, where we can invest to modernize the proposition. If you go back and look at some of the most successful retail transformations, that's pretty much all what they've done.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you very much, everyone.
Please welcome Renee Haas of Arm Holdings and Semaphor's Reed Albergotti.
Hello. Renee, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Thank you all for coming. So you're the CEO of Arm. Arm has a storied history in technology, basically enabled the mobile phone and many other devices, all without ever having to make a single chip, which means no supply chain shortages, no worrying about helium. Now you do have to worry about that because you are making this it's the AGI CPU is the name of it. So you're in this business now. Why do this?
Yeah, no, that's right. And here it is, by the way. This is the ARM AGI CPU. It is the first chip offered by ARM, and one of the trickiest things about this so far has been ARM has been delivering the IP, the blueprint for people who make chips for 33 years. So when people ask me, what does ARM do, I could just kind of rehearse that statement. And now that we've got this product, I have to think about what that opening looks like. Why did we do this? One simple reason is the market asked us to. The demand for compute is off the charts, as everyone knows, with AI. one of the big areas that people are demanding more and more performance around is these CPUs that drive all these agents. If you have agents bombarding the data center looking to increase workloads, the only chip that can do that is the CPU. So Meta, the partner we worked with on this, literally came to us some time back and said, hey, rather than licensing the IP from you, can you build the chip for us? And so we did.
So how did your conversations with Zuckerberg go there? Did you tell him you're crazy at first?
No, I mean, we dealt very extensively with Santosh, who runs the data center business, and Mark was very, very supportive of the effort as well. But Meta's got a lot of things on their plate, right? They do a tremendous amount of things on their own dime. They do their own chips, of course. But when they looked at the ROI of doing the chip themselves, using the ARM IP, or having someone like us deliver the solution to them, we both collectively looked at it, and the answer ended up being, you know what, the better answer here for both companies is ARM is the supplier.
Yeah, and now they're being made at TSMC.
That's right.
Everyone in the industry is like begging TSMC to give them capacity.
Including me now.
Including you now. So how did you get them to agree to this when you're a new entrant and maybe, I don't know, they don't know how big you're going to get?
Yeah, no, that's the right question to ask. Yes, TSMC is the builder of the chips for us. So we don't build chips ourselves. For folks who aren't familiar with the audience, something like this has a lot of people involved in the supply chain who actually make the device. The chip itself is fabricated at a company called TSMC. They're the largest in the world. Then it's packaged by one of our partners in Korea. We have a long relationship with TSMC because many of the chips that have ARM today, in fact, a lot of TSMC's output uses ARM. So we knew the people at TSMC, we knew the engineers, we knew the management. So when we came to them and said this was something we were looking to go off and do, we understood and knew how to negotiate for supply chain, for allocation, et cetera, et cetera. Demand has been off the charts for this. We are looking for more capacity. If there's anyone from TSMC in the room, we are looking for more capacity because if we had more capacity, we could sell more.
Yeah. Did they say you got to have this Meta deal lined up before you?
Yeah, they are very, very disciplined in ensuring that when they have a relationship with a partner like ourselves, that there's a relationship downstream, there's a customer, there's demand. So yes, there was a lot of checks and balances in the system, and Meta was great in terms of partnering around that. And just to explain a little bit more deeply about this capacity problem, because people hear, gosh, we need more chips, we need more memory. The amount of time it takes to build one of these factories and then order the equipment to go in those factories is a minimum of 3 years, probably 5 years. The capital is tens of billions of dollars. So if you're in TSMC and you're having to make a judgment call about how much demand will I have, you need to think 3 to 5 years out. So here we are in 2026. In 21, 22, there was no ChatGPT moment. There was no Anthropic. There was no huge demand for these AI data centers. So what you're seeing here is the result of, and they weren't the wrong decisions at the time, but they were decisions made based upon the best lens that they had relative to the overall demand picture, and here we are.
A lot of them. So when you talk about these shortages holding back industry, do you have any sort of big ideas about how, the U.S. and the world can sort of handle these supply chain constraints?
Yeah, one thing I was really struck by, and at that time, the imports of semiconductors were greater than the imports of energy. And China, as we know, has a lot of capability on the energy side, but imports a lot. So they were very, very focused on semiconductor supply chain, whether it came to fabs, equipment, people who could design chips, et cetera, et cetera. They were very circumspect about that policy. And the Made in China 2025 policy around semiconductors was really about being self-sufficient. That was one of the goals. Now, they're not there yet, but they're making lots of headway in that space. And if you look at China's history over 5,000 years, self-sufficiency is a mantra in terms of how China's operated. So fast forward, it's starting now to some level, but not so much on the global side, that people are realizing semiconductors are incredibly important. They power everything that we do. If anyone lost their key fob during COVID and it took a year to get it back, that's because the tiny chip that was inside there was way undersupplied and underbuilt, and you couldn't get any of them. So, to your big idea, I think the world needs global resiliency. I think there should be fabs on every continent. I think there should be equipment makers on every continent. I think we should be looking at getting private capital involved in more and more startups that can do the type of heavy equipment that's required, and then ultimately have these factories. Because the other thing is it's good hygiene to have supply chain resiliency. Just the way countries would love to have their own energy sources, countries should have their own sources for chips.
Back to what you said about the demand being through the roof. Is that demand from Meta then, or is it the other hyperscalers?
In general, because AI is such a compute-heavy workload, this is why you're seeing data centers being built across the world. This is why you're seeing demands for energy. It's really this compute. And what does that mean in terms of compute? When you type in a query into ChatGPT or Claude and it spits back the answers incredibly fast for you, those are tokens, those are words being generated by some data center. And those words cost money to generate. Someone's thinking to create the word, that's compute. Those words have to be distributed, et cetera, et cetera. And for those who use those tools, you'll now notice that ChatGPT always asks you a follow-up question. You know, would you like me to do this? Would you like me to do that? And the engine continues to feed on itself. So it's really the demand for compute. So it's Meta, it's OpenAI, it's Microsoft, it's Amazon, it's Google, it's everybody.
They all want to buy your chip, your CPU?
I would hope so. We're certainly trying. They are absolutely all candidates to buy our chip for certain.
I had Cristiano Amon on the stage, CEO of Qualcomm. You may have heard of that company.
I'm familiar with Qualcomm.
He was here saying that, look, we're building chips too. Because we do this for the mobile phone, our chips are going to be the most efficient. We know more about than anyone else. What do you say to that?
Well, it's the challenge we have today with AI, and I'm hoping it's a problem we can get solved soon, is that almost all of the heavy work gets done in the data center, and that's because the compute requirements are so significant. They're so large. These models, you hear about these trillion parameter models. That need to be some level of compute that takes place locally, some that takes place in the cloud. Physical AI, robots, that's a good application where things have to happen to some extent locally because of the latency.
This is going in the data center, though. It matters in the data center, too. Is your chip more efficient? Have you benchmarked it against the industry?
Our chip's a data center chip, yeah, and we've benchmarked it versus the competition, and the competition being x86. And for the same performance, it's half the power. So it's a very, very obvious advantage. And that's because we've taken the technology, because ARM is the heart of every single mobile phone, we've taken that power efficient story and we put it in the data center.
We get a couple more questions in before we run out of time. You mentioned TSMC. What about the US? You're talking to Intel about using their fab here. If you had to bet on the prediction markets that they come through with their next node, what would you bet?
Boy, you put me on the spot here. Intel is let me back up and say this. I think it's important for the U.S. that Intel succeeds. I think it's important because they're the leading edge fab that we have in the United States, and for decades, they were the process leader. For a number of reasons, which I won't get into, they fell behind TSMC, but I think it's paramount that they get back to an even footing, if not ahead. They're doing a lot to invest here. They've got a lot going on with next generation lithography in terms of EUV for their 14A process. Right now, they're behind TSMC, and TSMC looks like they're ahead. Can Intel catch them? Maybe. I'm not sure how I would handicap it, but I think it's important that they stay in the race and be competitive.
So do you think you'll be manufacturing chips in the U.S. In the near future, and can you give us a timeline?
Yeah, we would love to. TSMC has a giant fab in Arizona, which could be a candidate for our chips. Samsung is a partner we're looking at that's also in the U.S. And if Intel had competitive technology and the cost was right, would we build at Intel? Absolutely.
Is the memory shortage holding you back at all?
Absolutely. Yeah, the memory shortage is an issue. This ARM AGI CPU uses memory, uses DRAM as part of the overall footprint, and it is also constrained. So if everyone has any spare memory, we're interested. There's a constraint on memory for our product as well. So if our partners had more access to memory and/or we'd be able to sell more than we even forecasted.
Are there any other areas of the supply chain that you're worried about in the future? I know now we're dealing with the memory, we're dealing with helium, but like, is there a next shoe to drop when you look down the road?
In the semiconductor market, I think that the big ones are really, and ASML just announced terrific earnings. They are the single source for these EUV machines. These are extremely expensive, couple $100 million machines that are used in the fab that basically draw the circuits on the wafer.
They make about 60 a year.
Yeah, and they're the only supplier in the world that does that, and they have a supply
that are going to prevent that.
Yeah, and I think
run out of time.
The data center space, it's an engineering challenge because of radiation and such. But when power becomes the single largest element that's very expensive and hard to get, then space will make some sense. Today, the cost of the chips is probably more prohibitive, which says space probably doesn't get there. But will there be data centers in space someday? 100%.
René Haas, we're out of time. That was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for attending today's live journalism and to our partner Verizon. We hope to see you here for our afternoon program at 1:30 p.m.